Hello everyone, we're going to be taking a look at my friend Thomas Chamberlain Kane's artwork he did for a competition by Vativadya on the theme of the next Bloodborne game as a hypothetical project. I'm joined by Thomas himself, who is a concept artist at a video game company, Steven Zapata, who also worked on video games for a while, specifically Elder Scrolls, and Modern Day James, who also has his own YouTube channel sharing amazing artwork and animations. And I myself worked as a concept artist at ArenaNet for Guild Wars 2, and we're going to be diving into the concept art side of things, of how he came up with all these beautiful images and concepts for this hypothetical Bloodborne 2 that doesn't really exist, for this really cool competition. It's definitely a very long video, so there should be chapters dividing the entire conversation between introductions, Thomas's roadmap as to how he wrote this idea out using a program called Miro, diving into the artwork, and then of course diving into the lore of this cool project. Just hover over the timeline and you should be able to click wherever you want to go. What's up, everybody? I'm here with Thomas Chamberlain Keen. Am I saying it right?
Certainly is, yeah.
Steven Zapata.
Hi there.
And Modern Day James, or James Murphy.
Hello.
We're all just going to be looking at Thomas's really cool project he did for, what's the guy?
Vativadya, yes.
Right. He does a lot of Bloodborne lore, content, really good stuff if you're interested in the world building aspect of that video game. Really good stuff. I can just hand it off to you and you just run us through it, and we'll provide commentary,
Excellent.
Clap our hands and all that stuff. So.
And you'll also you'll be my audience to make sure what I'm saying makes sense, because we may dive off the deep end in lore and just but we'll try and keep it simple at first.
Wait. I already got grilled for quizzing Med earlier, so I'm a total nerd, yeah.
Me personally, I just recently started playing Bloodborne a few months ago, thanks to Steven Zapata. It's been really fun.
Yeah. I've loved Bloodborne for a long time. I played it for the first time back in, 2017, 2018, I think. And it quickly became probably my favorite game ever, maybe just my favorite piece of media ever, honestly. It does a lot of amazing things, and I love the way people spin off of it and sort of use it as a launching platform for their own creativity. And Thomas is ridiculously awesome at this kind of stuff, so this is really great to see.
For me, Bloodborne... Oh, Thomas, I just cut you off. I'm really sorry.
No, I was going to ask James, how about you?
Oh, Bloodborne is super close to my heart because it was actually the game that convinced me to drop out of med school and start pursuing art for video games. So it's a game that's really close to home for me. I got really sick during school, and I was sitting at home playing the game, and I think in my head as I was playing it, I was like, there are people that are making every little detail to this game, and it's so beautifully crafted. Everything else I was doing kind of seemed lame by comparison. And and I had always wanted to do something with video games because I've been so invested in them throughout my life. Yeah, that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, because after I played that, I just started drawing pretty much every day forever, and I just kept skipping class, and eventually that forced me to leave med school because I had no other choice.
Right. And so, that's amazing. I mean, I can totally see why, because it absolutely conjures up that feeling of something bigger, far bigger than you and whatever you've been doing. It's like, it just feels like there's a huge expanse of a world that you can explore.
And that combined with actually Vati's just deep dives into the lore got me so passionate about it, and I just couldn't imagine people actually creating something so beautiful. I was just all about it.
Well, from that inspirational story, I feel like I'm almost the imposter here in that I haven't played Bloodborne.
Oh no!
However, again, basically thanks to people like Vati, that's where I got my introduction to the actual story and everything. I've played the Souls series, so I knew I'd enjoy it going in. But yeah, I started off just watching his videos, really enjoyed those, and then this challenge popped up. The challenge is just called Imagining Bloodborne 2. So previously he's done challenges like design a boss for Dark Souls, or design like a weapon or an expansion that might exist. This really, it could be anything, and the only theme is just that it's something that could be a sequel to the game. I say sequel like a second release. He teased the idea that it could be a prequel, things like that. So really, it was totally open.
If I could bring up two things. So first, the question is, was the theme to just design anything, a full character? Just anything goes. It could have just been one weapon. It could have been a full actual game. Okay.
Exactly, yeah. And like he talks about how it's like, yeah, you can design a weapon, but maybe put some details in about how it links to the lore or how it would affect gameplay.
Second thing is, I don't know much about what's going on from Software, but there's always rumors about a sequel to Bloodborne, this and that, and it seems like due to bureaucracy and all that, that's probably not going to happen from what we can tell. Any thoughts on that?
So yeah, it seems like they haven't been able to up to this point, but also since they sort of are somewhat controlled by what Sony would like them to do, like Bloodborne's been so successful, you kind of wonder why they haven't thought to make another, and perhaps there still very much is plans to do so because it could be so successful. As far as the teasing, yeah, exactly, fingers crossed. And like the teasing, they put quite a few hints to that in Deracine, that VR game, which I haven't been able to play because it's PS exclusive, but that has a bunch of hints at a potential, or there's references to Bloodborne, but then there's like a book in it called Blood and Bones, and it's got a different character on the front, possibly an Aztec theme. There's like a little bird on the shoulder. So that's what got a lot of people excited, going like, oh, you know, they're teasing us. There's going to be a second game. It's going to be sort of Aztec themed or something like that.
And they're working on Elden Ring right now, correct?
Indeed, yes.
Okay.
Which I think have had some big leaks. There was like an internal pitch video that got leaked out or something, but otherwise they've been quite quiet in terms of information.
Yeah.
Thomas, sorry, Med. Thomas, can I ask real quick? When you started going in to do the project, did you hop into Bloodborne at all? Like, did you play it even a little bit, or you were just like, I'm going to go in blind?
I've seen playthroughs of it.
Okay, so I just want to rub my face and highlight to everyone how good Thomas is as a designer, that he can do something like what he did, having not played the game. That only feels like an ever bigger flex to me. So again, props to you.
Well,
Thomas,
thank you.
Some people just have sort of the designer's mind, where they can sort of dream themselves into a thing, even with a big kind of stopgap like the one that you're working with here, where you haven't actually played the game. And to me, the fact that, you sort of, you managed to do it so well having not played the game is just, kudos to you. You definitely have a designer's mind. You're very good at capturing mood. Good for you.
Well, thank you. In which case, maybe the best segue is to show you roughly how I went about doing that. Because I actually went and searched for a good app to do these sort of mind map things, and there's an app called Miro. This board's quite big, so as you'll see later on, it's a great tool, and I really recommend doing things like this because it's so much better to get your ideas out in front of you.
Okay, so I'm actually like perversely excited by things like this. So would you mind just like starting from like your first axiomatic choice of like, how would I organize this chart?
So
look at the thumbnail on the bottom right.
Don't think about that yet. So going in, maybe this is a useful one. So this is a competition. I have done a fair few competitions in the past. I feel like I've built up an idea of what like my general approach to competitions are. And obviously for me, the aim is to win. It's fun. It's a fun challenge. I enjoy it regardless, but I'm not just sort of making an entry because it's like a pure sort of fan art thing. At the beginning, I wasn't really a diehard fan at that point with Bloodborne because I just hadn't learned enough about it. Anyway, so I first made my little tree of try-hard strategies. And this is somewhat specific to Bloodborne already, but also just kind of general to the competition. It was sort of anything was allowed. And so my take of that is that I should try and do a bit of everything, which can weaken an entry, but just imagine if you did a bit of everything the best. Then it can only be a positive in the entry. With like a very bit of
enthusiast sweat.
Well, we'll get to it. So like something that I'm aware of, I did I ran a small competition on Instagram at one point, and so that's like my main experience with judging a competition. And the thing there that often comes to mind for me is that I want to try and be sort of impartial, and so to avoid just like immediate reactions to a piece, I try and break it down to what it does well and what it maybe falls short on. So kind of if you list out like, oh, it's strong at this element but weak at this element, that sort of implies that, well, the perfect entry, the one that sort of feels like an easy choice if you're judging, or just something that will stand out, is where it does everything right. Maybe it's not the best approach. I mean, it certainly requires more work, but I wanted to try and do everything and do everything well. And so I roughly laid out what that would be. So this is under my little good art tab, cover a bit of everything. So I sort of just roughly listed out things that I might need to keep in mind when going in. I want to try and touch a bit of everything. More high level aims, these are sort of more buzzwords, but it's great to type these out because they at least stay in your mind. Purposeful design, just think about it essentially. Because it's I'm trying to aim for that FromSoft feel where the more you like pull the lore apart, the little descriptions or the little details in the design, I want it to make it rewarding the more you look at it. And then, just epic stuff. The visuals are really striking. I need to make sure that whether there's interesting stuff or not, and whether the people understand the designs or not, they still look really good. Mm-hmm. So that was sort of like my basis for what I wanted to achieve with the artwork. And then, these bits are all to do with more Bloodborne specific things. So the lore, I want to make sure that I make the lore enthusiasts wet. I want there to be things that
tremble.
Exactly. I want them to see it and go like, oh my God, I get that. Because the really nice thing with the sort of lore stuff is that you make the viewer feel like they're sort of succeeding in something, or they're unlocking, they're pulling apart a mystery. It's far more engaging when they get presented like a challenge that they solve themselves. So I wanted, as much as possible, to put together an entry that basically gave you enough information, but not all of the information, enough to piece it together yourself.
Right. Beautiful.
Something was then important, and this is getting into like how it would be a Bloodborne sequel, is that I wanted to make sure that both my entry felt cool and significant, but it didn't just sort of ignore things that happened in the first game, or like rewrite them. I didn't want to like do any sort of retconning or anything.
Right.
And those are really the main things that I put together here. So the next bit was just to start actually researching Bloodborne properly. So I could watch the Vati videos. I'll go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to say to anyone watching to sort of pay attention, take notes of how you can kind of go about something like this, where the intent wasn't to just make a cool piece. The intent was to kind of cover so many different bullet points as a world builder, concept artist, or designer, or a member of a game dev team kind of would do. And so and just witnessing this is really cool, and kind of seeing it written out. This is kind of gold for anyone who wants to get into this. It's like a roadmap.
So it's interesting because I think I've actually got a lot better at this having started working for Playground Games, because previously I'd been doing sort of essentially outsource work. I was a creative partner sort of thing. So clients would come with a small section of the thing they wanted you to design, and that was it. And you didn't really have to think too much outside of that. And so now that I sort of have access to all of the teams that go into making a game, it becomes so much more apparent that essentially, ideally, everyone on the team knows what everyone else on the team is doing at all times. That's never possible at scale. And so you have to break it down into more manageable chunks. But having that overview means that you can design with purpose. And I very much took that into here, because in this case, I was essentially doing every aspect of the game.
Very cool.
Creation.
All right, carry on.
So these were Bloodborne specific things. It was kind of like, what are the main attributes that make the game interesting? So this is largely from observation. I watched some of the gameplay. I sort of also just other people describing it. I think Vati at some point did his own sort of take on what he thinks the game's important about. I have a little list of other places that I actually got like information from. So there's a bunch of stuff on Reddit where people are just like typing out what they think the game means and what the mechanics do and what they love about it, stuff like that. There's just other people on YouTube. Sinclair Lore, I think, was a particularly good one for just like long rambling discussions that I could put on in the background and then occasionally tap into little nuggets of interesting detail. But so I put out what was interesting about the first Bloodborne, and then that could let me go, how do I make this more interesting, or how do I expand on, or just be faithful to what the original game does? Because again, if I'm thinking what the actual developers would want to do, they need to make sure that they're appeasing their fans, but also making it a game worth buying. versus just playing the original again.
Very important to know your audience. You did a lot of work here for trying to know your audience and you're trying to add something, but you don't want to necessarily subvert expectations completely in a way that feels disrespectful or anything like that.
Yeah, and it's quite funny because like Vati in his videos sort of suggests that I think you'd put a post about it, and so people had like put in answers of like potential entries that someone might make, and it was like a Bergenworth dating sim, or like a Bloodborne cart or something, that sort of stuff. And it's like, obviously that's funny as an idea, but it does not fulfill. It's like those pillars, because it's totally different. It's not what fans would want.
Someone actually made Bloodborne cart.
Really?
Oh my god.
It exists.
It's a meme, of course, but
No, I hope they try to finish it. I hope they tried to finish it before the contest deadline and actually submitted it.
Put out like a fake trailer. That'd be fantastic. So yeah, and that's the setup. That's where I started. It was trying to be a little more careful with how I'm just sort of planning ahead instead of jumping into designs, because I feared making a cool visual that I then couldn't work into like a story that felt consistent. Because
I think a lot of us have been there, where it's like jumping into a piece without any kind of foundation work like this, and we may or may not reach a cool look, but to have some kind of anything to build onto, I think it kind of just carries the process rather than trying to force it.
Yeah, exactly. And the problem is always like if you find that it suddenly doesn't fit, it's almost like you discover a plot hole or something and you have to take something out. That sucks. It's potentially wasted work, and it's also just feels bad to like.
So do the groundwork ahead of time. Cool. Okay. So take us right in. Show us the art.
So, so let's keep lore stuff to afterwards. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, sure.
Essentially, I'd worked out all the story that I wanted to do. That basically happened on that big sheet, which I'll go through later. Now I just knew that I wanted to show some gameplay spaces. I wanted to show some cutscenes to sort of give the implication of story. There would obviously be some characters in that. There would be the player character. The player character, I wanted to show how they would like progress throughout the game. Essentially, these images are all supposed to be things that the player would actually be able to see. And the only place I sort of break away from that is just directly giving you information that you would have otherwise gained through gameplay. But in general, everything's framed as if this is how you experience the game. So, the big ambition was to just, if I could have, I would have made a game. I couldn't do that. So instead, I'm showing you what the game would have shown you.
Who knows? You might get an email from Software and ask you to move to Japan.
That's.
Can I just point out? I mean, I love the vibes, and it feels like a screenshot from the game. Well, hypothetically, and just the details that you pull off in a lot of your work. Just the mirage in the distance, the detail of the plant stuff on that hill area. Oh, look at that! Oh, I love it.
Lore significance so too. Cool. Like, I didn't just put that in randomly, but we'll get to that.
Oh, the mirage has something to do with the lore. Excellent.
Indeed.
The UI, the hunter's nightmare feel of like this, I guess, bones and it looks like a kind of coral reef kind of thing. But beautiful.
Indeed. So like, yeah, it's putting in enough interest. Something I also wanted to make sure, because I was sort of fighting my general urge to over detail things, is to keep the clear contrast between areas of interest and areas where I can just keep it as basically a swath of a single color. And that was great for this kind of like really bright, oppressive sunlit feeling, where it's like, how do you make a desert feel dark and brooding? Well, you can actually get away with, as I have done here, with a very dark sky, much darker than you'd expect. And that's just not realistic. But I've gotten away with it by having a pretty hard gradient from very bright in the horizon going up to this darkness at the top. And then everything in the foreground is like blown out so that you're still not seeing things in the same way that stuff gets hidden in shadow. I can kind of hide things in light. So
you're a genius. Steven, you were saying something?
I was just going to say that, Bloodborne 1, which feels appropriate to say here, Bloodborne 1 is very surreal in the way that it handles a lot of things, like the Blood Moon and Yharnam, all of the transitions between sky domes. I mean, they're all deep, they're all very unrealistic, and they have very supernatural effects. So I think you're totally within your rights to try to introduce little things like that in an imagination of the second one.
Yeah, it gives you a lot of room for creative freedom, doesn't it? Yeah,
for sure.
Question that I'm going to guess that many people are going to have from the perspective of a concept artist, and it's more of the technical things. Was this the first thing you sort of dove into designing, and how long did you spend on each piece?
Good question. I can quickly sort of cover that from the first part of it.
Process.
These are the initial sketches that I was putting out with some of the ideas alongside. This was nice because essentially I worked as zoomed out as possible. I just drew a bunch of little frames to draw within. You can ignore the text, I'll take that away. So
look at the little detail of the thumbnail frame on the bottom right.
I put the little hunter's mark in there because why not?
Love it.
And yeah, so I did this, and this is great because you're kind of forced to commit to doing a bunch of little sketches. It also just like prepares you to not try and make these perfect. I mean, I could just scribble in, get the ideas out, and then I have something to go from. So,
you see them as a group. This is such a good exercise. You see them as a group. Yeah,
exactly. So you can get an idea of the progression and like whether things are feeling boring or not, whether you're repeating the same idea. I might as well cover this now whilst we're looking at it. I realized that when I did these, my default was to do a central like view of pretty much everything that was big and impressive. So there was this big monster you're going to fight at one point. You're looking at it dead on in the front. There's a big old one you see at some point, dead on the front. Another big old one, dead on the front. Another creature. And I was like, okay, this is cool and all, but I can't keep doing this. I need to make sure that at some point we switch it up, have variation.
Great exercise. Yeah, it reveals where you repeat yourself.
Exactly. And that's much better to realize now rather than 10 hours into painting and you go, damn it, this is the same as the last one.
So with this spread that I'm looking at here, did you start on one and kind of stick with it, or did you kind of shuffle, do a little bit here, add some there, go back to this one there?
I think
one at a time.
Yeah, I did actually draw them in chronological order, and it's because I'd roughly worked out my story. I sort of knew what I wanted to show, and interestingly, this ended up working out well. But it was clear that at the beginning, like this whole section is like the same scene, and then maybe like this section's the same scene, and then suddenly there's huge time skips between each of these images, and it's because I realized there's no way I can show everything as it plays out throughout an entire game. It's supposed to be a 40-hour experience, so you can't keep like doing a screenshot every like an hour or something. So that was interesting because it made sure I was like, okay, I now have a sense of how I need to pace myself, what's practical like to complete within a month outside of work hours, because time is quite short essentially.
Yeah. I know you said ignore the text, but I mean, I was happy to see it. I mean, I think for a planning stage like this, actually being able to sort of one line your ideas a lot of the time is very clarifying for a lot of people. We have a tendency to put like way too much into pictures, or alternately like not enough. It's hard to get a balance unless you can sort of actually say what the hell you think is going on here.
It's a very good point. Yeah, and actually, it made the sketching much quicker. It's like, maybe you'd see this little blob here as a scorpion because it's like kind of got a tail and two claws, but it's much easier to just go wandering through desert, bloodstained, injured, maybe giant Scorpios. And so yeah, you're right. Like I think it speeds up the information communication. You don't have to spend time making these look good, as long as they represent what you're trying to show. And I'm clearly doubting myself still at this point. It's like I don't know exactly what I want it to be, but I have a rough idea.
And I just want to highlight that it's about the concept, the idea, which is why it's concept art, not necessarily a illustration to be intended to be a decorative ornament that you put on a poster. But it can be, but that's not the intent.
Yeah, and exactly. The can be comes later, right?
And the one-liner is, I think, what encompasses that, necessary idea. Yeah.
So I think it's very useful. These two are good examples of it. This is specifically lore stuff. Really, it's more like heavy story things, but it's great in general if you can describe your piece in a few lines. I've found, especially if I look back at older work I've done, and I don't know if you'll find this looking at your older portfolio, Ahmed, but like you can't describe what's going on because you just went in with I'm going to make something look cool and impressive.
Oh, yep.
And you have no idea what's the detail. Why is this scene happening, and what would it mean to someone? So, a very good exercise.
This project as a competition is such a great exercise because it puts you in a mindset as if you're at a studio. You have to make a thing, and it has to make sense. And if people listening, if you want to do something like that for a portfolio, try to think of something like that where you're setting up a hypothetical studio situation where you don't really have a choice but to kind of come up with something cohesive and prove like something that you can kind of bring to the table that's useful, like what we're seeing here.
Yeah, you got to prove that it's usable. Ultimately, it's got to go to like the cinematics director or environment like designer or something like that is going to go, okay, yeah, there's actually useful information in here that we can take. The pretty aspect of your artwork may be good for selling the idea, but ultimately it goes nowhere apart from maybe the art book after the game's released. Right. So.
Yeah, because you got to hand it off to a 3D modeler or someone, and they have to figure it out. And if it's just a kind of scribble, a scribble is one thing, but a scribble with a bit of text, the modeler can say, "Oh, okay, well, I can just look that up."
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, having done those sketches, I think it's worth showing kind of the stages I went through.
Please.
I knew which pieces I wanted to do. I'd chosen which ones were the most important because. Ideally I would have done even more work for this, but it's just impossible. There's not enough time. So I chose the ones that are most important. And essentially I just scaled up that little sketch I had and drew over the top. So I got this. And I wanted to make sure that I didn't get stuck in a piece early and then essentially waste time making one thing look great and the rest not. So I forced myself to do this for every piece that I was going to make. So this one actually got cut as well, which is interesting. That's a proper gameplay, a proper game dev thing happening there. Yeah, and I had these for all of the pieces. Oh my God. So we'll see these again later. But I'd done that version of the sketch, and that was really important because it meant that I knew what I could put in it, what I wasn't able to show in it, and therefore what I might need to put in a different piece.
Had you already sketched your hunter here, your protagonist that's up front, or were you sort of designing on the fly in the keyframe?
I was designing on the fly, largely because I knew that I had basically set it up so I could get away with anything I wanted per frame. I wanted to show a progression of the character, and because I knew in general the characters would be fairly limited in the pieces I was making, just because of the story I was telling. Essentially, if the character was in the foreground, you knew it was you and you knew it was the hunter. So them changing their outfit was just a more interesting and more realistic to how the game would play out detail that I quite liked.
Yeah, sweet.
Yeah. So I was just designing in the frame, and which gives some nice perks. It's like, in this case, I can make sure they have some flowy cloth on them to show the desert wind. And I don't restrict myself like options for those nice details up front.
I love how the whatever that stuff on the ground is in the foreground, it kind of looks like teeth, like molars. I don't know.
We'll get into it. So yeah. Anyway, so just to quickly show, because I think I actually saved out a nice few steps of this. I again tried to sort of keep everything coming up in terms of detail level, like across the board. So again, I wasn't getting too far ahead in one and not in the other. And these are just like an indication of the steps I went through when creating it. And so first was to just use some textured brushes to quickly get a bit of that sense of like sort of final detail, but in a way that I can slap down very quickly. And these are just to make sure I can get a color scheme in there that's fitting the mood I want. And you can see this one I actually went through a fair few variations because there was stuff about it not feeling as expansive or as analogous to a real desert as I wanted. And then other ideas like wanting to put in the mirage came in, potentially having a bit of a destination over here, but I ended up taking that out. So there was a few iterations, but these early ones, these are still very rough. And it's only once I'm sort of like settled with the final composition I wanted that I could start to put in actual details.
Nice. Big changes between all of them. Really big changes. That's a good sign, I feel like, for most progress. A lot of the times when you look at progress, the changes can be quite incremental, but really that a lot of the times when you're working on a piece, you find there's like gates where it's like you might work on it for a couple hours, and then really the best thing you could do after that couple hours is sort of put on a beginner's mind and be like, all right, if this was someone else's piece and I was just going to fix it, what would I do to it? What would be the huge changes that would really make it better? And it looks like you were doing that for real across those progression images. So
yeah, it's really good
cool,
to,
and I might love you and whatever.
It's really good to save out your piece and then open it up as a JPEG and then make edits. I think that's really important, because if you try and make edits in your original Photoshop file, firstly, it might already be big and therefore your editing is slower. But mostly you're like, oh, okay, well, if I just like make my edit underneath this layer, then I can preserve the layer I've already got. And it's like, that's the wrong mindset. You shouldn't preserve anything, because otherwise you're not going to make the changes you maybe need to. So save stuff out as a JPEG, ideally a tiny JPEG, and then make really rough edits to explore and sort of look at the potential of your image. Otherwise, you're just not going to make the hard decisions that you might need to.
Nice.
So yeah, a very good tip, I think.
I'm learning a lot right now. This is, I feel like I'm back at school and getting a lot of really nice insight on your process here.
Yeah, I just feel like I'm
choice
sitting here. I'm just sitting here silently getting a free lecture, so I'm all about it.
Sick.
Yeah, this is like great education.
A GDC talk meets Art Center lecture. It's great.
Oh well, I'm glad the quality holds true. So this is just the first piece. Let's move on.
Let's keep going.
Yeah. So here I have like a cutscene. I wanted to make sure it was sort of immediately obvious that we're not looking at the player character anymore. Firstly, because we don't have a figure in front; it's facing away into the scene. But also, I've put the black bars top and bottom. Hopefully, that's sort of enough information to just be like, this is a cutscene, not in game. But there's a bunch of other things that I ended up layering on top. Like, we always have a character in like in-game scenes, but also I have like some aspects of the UI, because it adds character, but also it communicates exactly what's happening in this image versus something like this.
Mm-hmm. It immediately read as a cutscene to me.
Yeah, since you're not really diving into the lore yet, I just want to, as a Bloodborne fan, like getting vibes of Gehrman's weapon from game one, something that feels almost like carriage-ish, which makes me think of Murgo, the wet nurse. I'm getting the illusions are happening and are whetting my appetite for Bloodborne-iness. So I think that you're really triggering all those good things there with these pieces. This is great.
Excellent. And yeah, I wanted to make sure that, again, going back to my sort of overview of what is going to make the submission successful, especially for fans, who obviously Vati, being the main judge, is a fan. Yeah, I wanted to make sure that early on I'm like whetting the appetite, essentially. So it should make you immediately go like, oh, I want to know why. Like, what's going to happen next.
Yeah. There's this vibe of mystery, but also the carriage thing in the back has a very almost, I guess, organic feel to it, where it has a shell, but the curtains being red looks like raw meat, which is so cool.
Yeah. And what's this?
Tentacle.
Oh my god! Is that a baby slug?
Also, I noticed the hands on the character in front are very slug-like or tentacly.
Indeed, yes. There's a little hint coming out through there. So, this was the second image. It was supposed to feel very cinematic, and part of that is also I've chosen to use a very long lens. So versus here, where you can see foreshortening taking place across the scene. Characters big in the front, small in the back. Everything's getting smaller as it goes towards the distance. Here, we don't get any of that sense. It feels much more like a telephoto lens, the sort of thing you would film like a big tiger that you don't want to get close to in the wild. And because of that, what we get is essentially very little stacking of like layers in the plane. So we don't have a midground, foreground, midground, background in the same way. We're looking up slightly, so we just don't see any background. And that means we can focus entirely on this subject. And that's what I want this scene to be. I want it to be, these are important characters and there's important reasons I've made this character the way it is and the weapon the way it is. I want you to focus entirely on that.
Can I make a guess? So there's the gem on the necklace area of the character. Is this by chance a form of the doll and raising the new baby slug from the end of the game?
It is indeed. And I'm very glad that comes across because, that's what I want it to do. I want there to be enough. Yeah.
Well done, Med.
Well done. You passed the first hurdle. This is good.
The hunter's dream, it's, my understanding is if you watch Jesus Hears Toast, his streams talks about the doll being Odin or Odin, however you say it. And we all think she's evil, blah, blah, blah. But, she can manifest differently in different realms and dimensions of existence.
It's interesting you bring that up just because, the interpretations of the original lore, they go in wildly different directions. So I will have my own take that makes sense of this story that may differ. But yeah, so this was this piece. And then we move to this. So here
that one gets like a ton of bricks. Jesus.
Yeah, I want to play it.
So I'm also curious, like, what's your first vibe, I guess, in terms of what's going on as well here?
Yeah, I immediately read this like the first time that you wake up in the hunter's dream. I remember, from your board that you're calling yours the hunter's reverie, which I love, basically the same thing. But yeah, same exact, that's how I read it. Same moment, like, welcome to the new hub. Here's the doll. Here's your messengers. This is the overall design of the new hunters. And then, maybe some workshop equivalent inside of the hut that directly communicates the new world design, and maybe that'll catch fire later. That's possible.
It has a lot of elements too that make it feel like you're home. The very rounded shapes of all the architecture, and the color is really nice in contrast to the last scene, but there's still that Bloodborne-iness that makes it really uneasy, like the shape of all the fish that are hanging from those hooks.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's really interesting you brought that up, because I was thinking the same thing. It's like, there's reasons I want it to feel more homely and friendly, but where am I going to get the edge? Well, luckily our character's still injured, and they're covered in your good old sort of Bloodborne-y, or just Soulsborne-y, like old wrapped cloth and stuff. And you've got the little skeletons, the little messengers. So there was a bunch of places I could make sure I still have a bit of that edge. That keeps it feeling Bloodborne-y. And again, I've just made sure that the sky has that same sort of dark, brooding tone. Nothing's too friendly.
When I see this, I can hear the music from the Hunter's Dream. It's pretty
excellent.
And your attention to detail is insane. Even the directionality happening in the grass, you can see that there's wind going through it. That's some game dev juice right there.
Yeah, and it's not really blowing because it's blocked by the thing here, and it's like, there's some thought.
Oh, you genius!
There's some thought going in here.
I hate you.
So yeah, this is the Hunter's Reverie. The Reverie is it's somewhat synonymous with daydream, which is my whole point here. I didn't want it to be just another dream. Also, you go into this from a desert during the day rather than night, so I was like, yeah, daydream makes sense. Also, in general, the theming is more about how there's always the sun in the sky, even though it gets blocked. But it happens during the day rather than at night. So just making that switch obvious and then congruent with how I name all of these places, it's just made sense.
Oh, it's so cool.
And it's nice because these things fitting together, that's that's getting all the lore enthusiasts wet. That's the that's the juicy stuff. So
a valuable step.
Yeah. So then this is one of the first times I just give you a wall of text. There's stuff which I can't show and I can't tell you without writing it out here. Ideally, I would make an entire game and you would experience this information firsthand, but I can't do that. So instead, things like it's written in flavorful language, but it doesn't tell you anything that you wouldn't experience by playing. And it's sort of broken up into this is the first image. It takes you through what happens in that second image where you see the doll, and then it talks about Hunter's Reverie. Again, I haven't named it Hunter's Reverie. I think the file name is, but in the image it isn't called that. But I put enough stuff in here, like I talk about how the doll stands patiently in front of you. It's directly referencing what's happened in this image. So for anyone that's paying attention, fingers crossed, you're like, oh, okay, this must be called the Hunter's Reverie. I don't think I need to explain that thing to you, which is nice. It's sort of like I can do that whole don't insult the player's intelligence kind of thing, which, you know, all of the people that review games and stuff will complain about in many cases. And this thing,
journalists.
Exactly. And I listen to a lot of that critique. I really enjoy it. And it's cool to be able to try and keep that stuff in mind when making something like this.
This game's too hard.
This game's too hard. And then, you know, the other thing to point out on the screen is that, like the UI previously, I haven't lifted it directly from the original game. It's heavily inspired though. And I want to make it feel as much like the information screens that you get in game, the original game, but it's now new. It's rethemed. It's like essentially desert themed, roughly, and it's got a new color palette.
Cool. Great choice there, I think. Yeah.
So it gives you all the information you need, and then we move on to the first item that you get given, and this is again even more closely referencing how the item screens look in the first game. Mm-hmm. But with the new palette, with the new symbols and things, and instead of having the hunter's mark, I have this new mysterious mark that may have some meaning. Oh, interesting.
Man, this is so convincing.
Yeah.
Good job. I mean, you know, another just time management, you know, like Thomas, you really put the work in here to like actually render out the sack. And I mean, to me, I'd give you an A+. I mean, I would just buy it in a From game. It looks, it has the level of finish. It has the level of finish. But the big lesson here for a lot of students and people who want to get into this stuff is like, think of the time management necessary to nail the prop, but then have the dressing, like the way that he did the inventory screen, just perfect. Like, it's not sloppy, it's on the mark, it captures the mood. Like, that takes time too, right? And a lot of people wouldn't really factor that into their time management. And you wrote the damn lore text, which is like, please everyone, practice your writing. Like, practice your writing, please.
I think this is the best case scenario of where writing matches up with art, because I am so excited by, obviously, like the technical part of your rendering is beautiful, but I'm excited by the fact that there's a giant tick that is being fastened shut so that the blood doesn't leak out. Like, it's so exciting, and just everything about it is just so great.
Gruesome.
Yeah, so yeah, like, it's good that comes across, because it needs to roughly make sense, even though it can hand wave a lot of the practicalities. But it's a good thing you point out. So, you know, the rendering of this, it's got photo bashing, it's got painting. I did a rough sketch and then just sort of pieced together photos and painted on top. That took as much time, if not less time, than putting together the actual the UI essentially for this.
I suspected something like that. Thank you for telling people that. Most people would never imagine this until they've tried it. So thank you for saying that. And
like, if you're strapped on time, then perhaps, you know, for a design project, 4 of these items may be more useful than 1 item and or 2 items and like the fancy UI. But in this project, because I wanted to make sure the presentation, like it needs to feel like this was the game showing you information, that was just as important. And the nice thing is, I have 4 items or something maybe that I show in this entry. So I reuse all of these elements. And also I built this background first, but then for this, it just meant taking away the book, moving these lines around. Like, these are all little elements, graphic elements that I can just reuse everywhere else. So I didn't redraw these; I just rotated them.
Of course.
And that meant that, essentially, I did the hard work once, and that could extrapolate to make everything look a lot better and consistent, which was very important. So now we get into the first like big cool screenshot, and essentially this would feel, I imagine there'll be a little section before this, but the first time you enter the city. So I wanted to show there's a big expanse to the left, there's immediate gameplay to the right, and then there's all the other things that hopefully make it look like an enticing world to go into.
I'm enticed because I was about to mention that. It says Upper Loran in the bottom right, like you just entered the zone. I'm very enticed. I'm very enticed.
So we've got, exactly, like unlike the beginning where it's sort of supposed to be akin to the kind of amnesiac running through, like just wandering, not knowing where you are. You've been dropped into the game not knowing anything. And so why not make the player in the same state? That way any information given to you is being given to the player at the same time. You don't get any of that weird kind of, why am I getting an exposition dump? It's information the player needs to know as well. So that solves all of those problems quite nicely. And yeah, this is the first time you know where you are. You're being told it's up Loran. You've even maybe been through a fight or something. You've got a couple of blood echoes. And something listed in here. It talks about how you talk to the doll. She gifts you with an old hunter pistol. She gives you a tarnished cannula. And you're free to begin the game. So you now have your cannula listed up here and some blood sacks. I'll go into that bit later when it pops up, but it's then a consistent thing that I make sure is always seen and always like essentially consistent with what the player has done previously.
What I love... Oh, go ahead, Steven.
Keep going, Matt. It's your channel.
What I love is the stark contrast of, we still feel like it's Bloodborne, but the choice of the costume here, or the outfit, red, gold, swirly swirls, whatever you want to call it, it still has the Bloodborne almost silhouette of what a character could look like in the game, but it just feels like it's the next iteration of the game experience. And I also imagine that the trick would be using that sheath kind of like Ludwig's blade.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So I wanted to make sure any weapon I put in has to be a trick weapon. Otherwise, it's just disappointing.
Dude, I'm done. This is
so
give it.
And this is specifically Aztec influenced?
So that's the thing. Yeah. This one, it's taken a bunch of references from all over the place in terms of actual design, but I wanted there to be that Aztec theming. It was sort of teased a lot. It was suspected a lot, and I was like, well, I might as well run with it. It won't be full on Aztec, as all the architecture is quite different. And also, in the original game, the Nightmare Frontier is thought to essentially be Loran, or at least aspects of it. So I've made sure that design language from the buildings you see there are carried forward. This tower at the back is actually very close to one of the towers you see where the amygdala comes down. Sorry, we're getting too deep already, but the point is I have made sure I've gathered like pieces of architecture that I know already exists, so I can stay at least slightly consistent with that, and then mix in my own things afterwards.
I know we're planning on keeping sort of a lore download till the end, but just for people who really have no clue, I think it might be good to say that Loran is referenced in Bloodborne 1, so it's like it is a place that we don't. Well, I guess you might say you go to parts of it, like in the Chalice dungeons and things like that, supposedly. But it is a place that's referenced, and there's lore allusions to it is a place that was, I think they say, swallowed by sand and things like that. So your moves here, your baseline moves, like the very first choices, are not out of nowhere. They are respecting lore drops that are in Bloodborne 1.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so every sort of base idea and everything you see here is born from looking at the lore, looking at where there was essentially gaps in the original game that I could fill with something interesting. Like I wanted to answer questions that were posed in the original, and then add some new spice that's sort of original from me. And yeah,
just to think that bringing back the idea that you never really played the game, but you're still a fan to such a degree that you've built this place. And I'd almost say you're a super fan, and I think Stephen was kind of saying like it's an even bigger flex to do that.
And I would really describe myself as a huge fan, because I have spent a lot of time, maybe not as much time as like a complete playthrough would take, but I've been through all the wikis and reading up on all the fans subreddits and obviously the YouTube videos, which are the most accessible versions, and then just scrubbing through the no commentary versions to like find aspects of the game that I couldn't otherwise get like image references for. So I've like ended up having loads of experience of it. And interestingly, things like the simple movement mechanics, they were actually some of the hardest bits of information to track down, because I was just like, I'm not exactly sure like what button you press. Well, maybe not what button, that's simple, but like what exactly happens when you heal yourself? Is it instant or is it not? That kind of thing. I was like, oh, I need to check, because I haven't experienced this firsthand. And that didn't come into mind.
A lot of people wouldn't even ask. Wouldn't even ask that. So yeah, that's very thoughtful on its own. I love this. Yeah, and I mean, I'm biased here because I was, when Bloodborne 2 speculation started, I was on the side of please do Loran. Please.
Excellent.
So I think I'm biased here. But as to the picture, which is beautiful, I just do want to say that one of the things that stands out to me is that you are going for sort of the From Software scale. And I think that you got it, like you were talking about before, gameplay in From games tends to happen in a very wide open, like probably like 100-degree FOV kind of view behind the character. Like it's very wide so that you can see stuff coming from all sides, which makes the action combat more dynamic. But that's balanced with like this huge depth of space, like you feel it a lot in Yharnam, you feel it a lot in like, Dark Souls 3 for me has like some like full castles in the distance that just, they may be low poly, but the sheer scale of distance between the character and things way out there in the draw distance, it really feels like they're dozens or hundreds of miles away, right? And like that huge retaining wall that you have all the way on the left side, the image over there, that captures some of that From stuff. So that's like a meta thing that you're doing there, that if you had left things like that out, it wouldn't have quite felt like the From style. So that was very insightful of you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just that's the sort of thing you can get from just looking at a screenshot that looks cool. It's like, do a quick scrub through gameplay and, just go, okay, this image is visually arresting. Why? And then essentially try and match it. So yeah, you absolutely point out the things that it does. It's things that are close to you and you can interact with, things that are far away and you want to see. Like it gives you that sort of urge to explore. And to quickly go into that a little more, games specifically need to have gameplay spaces. So it generally means chunks of flat ground to fight enemies on. It's always really dull when you're trying to make it function for a specific mechanic like fighting, but you want to then show that there's interest within it. So I was like, okay, I'll have like a big space here. Some enemies are coming towards you. You've got like the big ticks, which I've called Ixodida. They're coming down, ready to fight. But we've also got like a few, some planes, extra levels that we're going to sort of maybe go through this door here, work our way through, come through this tunnel afterwards. We can cross this little bridge. Like we can even see down here, there's another little door. So perhaps at some point we're going to go below the city. That's nice. This is a little too small, but there's a little chest over here,
Nice.
It's I didn't have much time to put too much detail in here, but it's a nice inclusion because it's something you can interact with. Same with this like big mechanical thing in the foreground. I don't go into.
Speaking of time, how much time would you say you spent on this piece itself?
I would go with 8 hours maybe. And a lot of it is, it's heavily photo bashed, so I could get a lot of this stuff in pretty quick. And it's then painting over to make sure it fits exactly what I need, sort of design wise. So yeah, like huge chunks are like this whole piece here is originally a piece of photo. You can see I've changed the shape of all the windows. I've added doors. I've added this sort of archway here. I've added original elements of the Loran that exists in Bloodborne 1, and I've made sure that it fits into this foreground piece. But otherwise, yeah, chunks like this I didn't paint out manually. I'm not going to be painting these bricks myself, that kind of stuff.
I think on the note of making those battle planes sort of dynamic and interesting, you and as well as FromSoft do a really good job of adding rubble and things that sort of direct the player and make it feel like it's not just this flat, boring piece of ground that you have to sort of interact with. It really adds a lot of detail, and I feel like everywhere where there could just be a flat 90-degree angle has some sort of uneven stonework or some sort of rubble that just makes it more interesting.
this is my favorite chunk of it. It's like it remains smooth, so it's like the player's not going to get stuck on it, but it still feels like such a nice chunk of like the ground's like sort of warping underneath, and you're getting this disruption in the tiles. Yeah, the last thing I was just going to say, this stuff, it has no specific purpose. I don't really bring it up later on, but it hints at the larger game. It's like I couldn't show this myself, but the game's going to have some cool puzzle mechanics in. Like it's going to have cogs and stuff, ancient machinery that you will operate and make things open up. It sort of like it invites the imagination to go, oh, that could be cool. Imagine a big gate that you can't get through until you pull all of the levers, for example. And if I hadn't had that there, then that's just a bit of sort of the viewer's imagination that never gets triggered. So it's like sort of a low effort inclusion in that it doesn't link to anything. I don't even have a closed door in the scene that it could link to, but it still sort of lays the groundwork for it.
It lowers a platform somewhere. That's what it does.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't need to show that. It's fine. The last thing I'll point out here, so we don't have to go back, is just that I have like some sand draining away. So, going back to the whole buried in the sand thing. Yes, it was buried in the sand. It's drained away. That's cool. So we again get another one of these. This just describes what happens in this first stage of the game. Fun references to like potentially mechanics stolen from other places. So Dark Souls is the crystal lizards. We could have crystallized Ixodida, little things that scurry away. And with each of these like sort of information dumps, essentially, I'm adding more information about the mechanics in the game, because I think there's stuff that actually links into the story I'm telling, but also things that I just wanted to expand on because I had interesting ideas for how the game would play. So the main thing here is that the level up, also the healing mechanic in the first game is you take a blood vial and you stab it in your leg and you get your health back. Now you always have a cannula equipped, a nice gruesome blood themed, very soulsy feeling device, and you plug in your little blood sacs and drain blood into you that way. And the cannula adds an extra step in a sense, but what it does is it essentially gives another layer to the healing mechanic. So the cannula will now change the effect of your healing. So it could be it could be a bigger heal, but over a slow amount of time. It could be a small heal of like instantly, any sort of range in between that. And also it could just give you temporary buffs. So you now have the opportunity to like, even if you don't need to heal, you can use it just for the buff, things like that. You have like more options and more reasons you might want to use it. You could use a slow healing device before you go into combat with full health, just so that during combat, when you're losing health, you're already gaining it back to sort of make up for that.
So
I like that a lot.
Yeah, that's really interesting. To clarify, for what a cannula is, I'm assuming it's the IV kind of needle that you'd have if you have like a bag of whatever.
Yeah, I'll quickly skip forward. Here we go. So this is something we'll get to later, but this is this is the cannula that I put together as the item, and yeah, it wouldn't function quite like this. Exactly. In a hospital, when they cannulate you, they do use a needle, but the needle is to open the skin so they can put a little rubber tube in, and of course the rubber tube is now a safe thing that's not going to continue to pierce your skin, like when it's in your arm. Because these are reusable, you can plug them in and out. Nice gruesome soulsy fashion. You just stick the needle in, it just stays there. Technically functional, but like imagine if you wiggled that, you'd stab everything. So don't think about it too much.
I really like this. Just to clarify my interpretation, it's sort of it makes me feel connections to like Yosefka's blood vial and Aliana's blood vials in Bloodborne 1. So I don't remember which does which, but one heals a large amount of HP. One, I think, heals HP over time or something like that. So I personally never use them much in Bloodborne 1 because they're so rare that they don't really stick in your memory. Like, I don't even remember when I have them on me half the time when I do a playthrough. So the idea of instead getting those effects through an item, an intermediary item that you always have, that actually makes more sense to me, because then you always know you have it. You always know that kind of heal is available, instead of being like, do I have Yosefka's on this run? I don't know. So I like that a lot if I'm reading that the right way.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't know. I could just be wrong on this. As far as I know, you only get 2 Yosefka's blood vials, because you get one when you first go, and then you can go back and like complete her story and get another.
If you kill her out when she's one of those goobers.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, exactly. It means that it's a cool idea, but you never really get to capitalize on it. And so here I'm thinking that these are, whether this is practical sort of in real life or not, you can hot swap them. So you basically choose to use them as you approach a combat situation. You're like, okay, there's like a ton of enemies here. I know I'm going to like need to heal sort of quickly, perhaps in the fight or something. So I'll choose something which allows me to heal quickly in case I'm about to die. Versus like one big enemy that you're going to be engaged with continuously, and you're like, okay, I'll go for the low and slow, heal right before I go in, so that I'm already like getting health back, and try and dispatch with them quickly, and know that you won't need to like jump back to heal or something. So it's like you can make that choice ahead of time.
I like that because it's similar enough to the old game that it feels consistent, but different enough that you're introducing new mechanics to it.
Yeah.
And as far as practicality goes, it's not very practical to syringe yourself while being attacked by beasts already. So, I think this is well within the realm of feasible for the
believability.
Game.
Yeah.
I'll do a no cannula run.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the thing. You can see how it would lead to the you never pick up this XY, you never use a blood sake. It's like all of the challenge runs that stem from that kind of idea. And so things here, I also put out the chest to the left requires a heavy attack to open it, yields the tendon saber. So in case you didn't notice the very, very tiny little chest here, I call it out just because I'm like, I put the detail in, I might as well make it mean something. And I'd also designed this weapon. So
a tendon saber, cool.
I didn't have a chance to do as many weapons as I'd like to, just because I like designing these weapons. It's good fun. But I wanted to make sure at least 1 or 2 of these like trick weapons were properly displayed in their full glory, so you can see how they would function, what their one-handed versus two-handed uses are, and also it means I can put in some of the extra lore. So I'll go into that later. But in this case, I have a weapon. The trick weapons in the original game are all about how they switch between 2 forms, and so I just show it twice in its expanded form and its contracted form.
I have never seen anything like that where you have a blade and this kind of ripple squiggle area. That's it's kind of reminiscent of the serrated nature of the saw cleaver, but not quite, because it's got that kind of roundness to it. I've never seen that. That's very cool.
It's a crazy one. So not specifically Aztec, obviously, but just through research into interesting weapons, like I found this, and it was described as something that maybe was used to sever the legs of a horse. Sorry, this is getting graphic. But the point being that you could incapacitate a horse or a knight on horseback or something. And I'm assuming that this is essentially functioning like a serration. So if you imagine you extend this out and then you pull back. So essentially, like it comes into contact and then the blade is in contact as you pull all the way down. Brutal. It's kind of like, I don't know, gets through the skin, and then the bit at the end is just to like do a big swipe through the tendon. I don't know.
All right, cool.
Regardless,
Gross.
Very cool. And I was like, this actually makes a lot of sense, because if they're fighting like big beasts, and
it also looks like it could have one of those complicated From Software hitboxes where different parts of the weapon do different damage or different kinds of damage. Like
exactly.
The middle of the sword could do slash damage, slash standard damage, and then technically the tip could do thrust damage, because when you're swinging it in that direction, the very hook at the end is going deep in. So that's dope.
Yeah, cool. That's a really good point. I didn't think of that at all, but that would be really nice. And so you can like position yourself close or far away for the different effect. Mm-hmm. So moving on, we then have the first big boss fight. The thing to note here is that previously I had it just front on to the camera, which looks cool, it looks big and imposing, but I wanted to save that for a shot later on, because like the big symmetry, like sort of perfectly composed, feels more like photography. That's carries weight with it that I wanted to save for a more important scene.
Yeah, you'll notice in a lot of formal compositions that are usually religious or have some kind of holy, I guess, vibe to it, there's going to be a lot of symmetry. Things are in the center. And, if you look at Vicar Amelia or all these fights that you have in these altars, they use that. But it's kind of cool here to see the boss fight isn't supposed to convey that. It's just kind of like this weird, gross, giant tick.
Yep. Yeah, and
it's truly hideous.
I can't even imagine the reference you were looking at for these things. And don't show them, please.
Okay, cool. I'll quickly show you because I had a couple of stages on this. Something early on that I tried, something that maybe would make it feel bigger, was lighting it from behind. Ultimately, I decided against it because whilst it was cool, it didn't have the mystery or the terrifying emerging from the darkness that I ended up with. For the process of putting it together, I was starting to fall back into my previous sort of habits of just filling everything with information and then pulling back. And this essentially I found is not good, because I was trying to put all the information of the ticks back here and everything before then putting in the atmosphere. And that was just hampering my ability to actually capture the mood. What I needed to do, instead of trying to preserve all of this stuff with these ticks and the brick and all that kind of information that doesn't actually add any more to the scene because we've already got that stuff here, what I need to do was just push it back completely, make these silhouettes at most. And that means we can properly focus on unique elements of the scene. It's sure, I can make this chair stand out a bit more. I can obviously bring attention to the boss itself. And we get all the information of the ticks and brick wall and stuff on this side.
Is that a thumbprint texture on the boss? Or some kind of fingerprint?
It does look like that. It was actually the texture of a real tick.
Oh God.
Sack. So
nice.
But yeah, it was a cool one, so I kept it in and sort of blended it with other stuff.
I just want to note that in the previous version that you had, the weapon the player was holding was like a scorpion claw. Was that another trick weapon you were thinking of doing?
I'll show it. It comes up pretty soon.
Okay.
It was sort of another thing that kind of got cut because I just couldn't work out how to make it work. But
it stood out because it was a cool idea.
Yeah, it's a nice idea in theory, and I was like, how do I make this function? Anyway, so this is the piece here, and the nice details again are that you have
forbidden.
You have now upgraded. You've got a new cannula, the forbidden cannula. You've got more blood sacs now. I just want to say,
forbidden cannula sounds like such a from thing. Just like the really weird way that they name things. Just because screw it, Lovecraft did whatever he wanted.
Absolutely,
that's really good.
And
I'm very curious as to why it's forbidden. Also,
I can say, and the best bit is it has meaning.
Of course.
So yeah, and then I have the stamina and health increasing as you're leveling up. You're also just getting more blood echoes, and you've also gained insight at this point. So these numbers are going up. It's just nice to have that thing tick up and that sort of thing. So I also just have the name of the place you're in. Just adds a bit of context. It's nice.
You are a designer at heart. This is
and that's the thing. These elements are really exciting. It's sure, making the art is cool and it's big and epic, but these little extra bits which give you more information and make the world feel real, make it feel like a real game. It's so exciting.
What comes across is that you're playing with this. It's very playful for you. You're exploring. It's very much like this undiscovered sandbox. Well, I guess, being a sand themed thing.
Hey.
It's interesting because I think it doesn't seem like you were under pressure to try to make something awesome for the sake of awesome. It seems like one of your goals was to just, whether you know it or not, was to have fun with it, and that comes across so clearly.
I think it's a good point to. Yeah, it's hard to say exactly what was going through my head, sort of in terms of the real intent behind it all. But I definitely did have a lot of fun, and it's the elements like this feel like they're more rewarding because they take less time to implement, but they sort of give so much more context for the image versus the illustration, which obviously does take quite a bit longer and really serves a single purpose, which it always has. It needs to look cool.
Were there parts, and it might be something in a piece we see later on, were there parts that felt like they were just a chore and you didn't really want to do and it didn't really need to be done anyway kind of thing? Or was it like everything kind of cohesive in terms of production?
I would say that was the over detailing of scenes like this, that I was like, oh, this is taking ages. And I just wasn't realizing that I didn't need that information. I just needed to get rid of it. And there's a piece later on which I think really exemplifies, because it was the last image I did, exemplifies almost my learning process across this project.
Great.
So
yeah, we can also talk about what you learned.
Absolutely. Yeah. Another little detail, you got the tendon saver. I've done the art for it. Just slap it in. That's it's a nice
pre-transform.
Exactly. So it's a nice way to keep it contiguous. And
oh my god.
Yeah, you have to drain the sack. So okay, I'll quickly go into this because it's not lore specific. It's more just sort of ideas for game design. I have no idea if all of this stuff would work out when you actually made it into a game, but the ideas are fun. You go into the boss fight. You've got this huge thing. You're like, oh god, how am I going to do this? You start attacking it, and you realize it heals itself after you attack it. Great. You're also surrounded by a bunch of the little Ixodida that are just swarming you. So, like in typical sort of FromSoft fashion, you start attacking the boss, and you feel like, I'm fucked. This is going to be a horrible fight. And then you experiment with a couple of things. You realize if you run around the back and attack it at its blood sac, it clearly does damage, and it bursts and rivers of blood spurt out, and it's like, oh great, I'm making some progress. The slight caveat is that the blood is toxic, so you have to attack and then dodge to make sure you're not covered in toxic blood. Cool. And so you're like, oh, I'm making progress now. It's healing less quickly now as I attack it, and also it's clearly getting closer to like an end point. The sac's getting smaller. Great. Though at some point you realize that as it gets smaller, it gets a lot more nimble too. And so it's a lot faster now and can dodge and attack you faster. So it's like, shit, the fight's actually getting more difficult again. And all of this sort of like back and forth I just thought was really fun. So at some point you attack it enough, its blood sac drains completely. It lets out some big shriek, all the little Ixodida run away. And then you essentially fight its second phase. So at this point, it's far faster than the original. It is now weaker and it has less health. It can't regenerate, but also it can dodge and attack you more quickly. And it also uses this big whip attack. So before it might just sort of stab you with its mouth parts, but now it splits open. It's got this long area of attack whip thing that will whip out and then pull you in, which I just thought would be a fun and terrifying boss attack to happen. So you have to be aware of that. And eventually, you kill it, and hundreds of baby Ixodida will crawl out from her carcass. Lovely. But the important thing is it drops the midwife's cannula, so that's the weapon you get. And if you attack its mouth parts, it will drop the Ixodida Queen hypostomy. Hypostomy is just the name for the little mouth parts.
I was just going to say, it's so awesome how much detail you put in terms of gameplay, and I can already imagine just how fun this game would be to play just by looking at the drawings and your descriptions of them.
And an interesting thought is imagine what the player experiences with it. So as I sort of mentioned, it's kind of like a bit of a roller coaster of emotions. It's it feels insurmountable, then it's like, oh, this is possible. And then it gets harder. It's just a fun playing with the player's sort of expectations. And also, how might you then tackle this the second time? Well, now that you know the boss, like the little Ixodida disappear after it gets to the second stage, you can go in with maybe the right type of weapon, quickly attack the back of it so it does the shriek, and then it's that gets rid of the little ones. So you can know that it's safe to just run around the back, smash it to bits. And if you've got toxic resistant armor or something, then you don't have to worry about the gushes of blood. So it's there's all these opportunities that allow a second playthrough or even just a second attempt to be optimized. Which is just a really fun thing to sort of imagine from a player point of view.
It's so cool.
So, drops the midwife's cannula. Despite being alluded to earlier on, and I've described the mechanics for it, this is the first time you see it as an item. But this is the cannula. It shows exactly what it is. One detail I didn't put in the entire submission is I never drew the cannula on the player's arm in any of the scenes. I just didn't have time.
I think we could forgive that.
I know, such a shame, but it would have been a nice one. Anyway, this stuff is referencing stuff in the original game. It's quite lore important, but we'll get back to it later. And I've described what the cannula does already. But again, so something like this, the image itself here, because it's like a small part of a bigger image, it was much faster to do than like a full painting, but it feels like it adds just as much value. So spending the time to make this sort of crisp and polished and really feel like it could absolutely just go straight into the game, felt like it was worth it to me. So
Super cool.
that was nice. We then have the Queen's Hypostomy. Don't need to go into it in too much detail, but a trick weapon, does some cool stuff. It just mimics the attack, so it shoots out the barbed whip, pulls the enemy in, and then if you've got a drip cannula, so referencing the real medical use of a cannula where it's like constantly feeding you an antibiotic or salient or something, the idea is that if you've got the right cannula equipped, use the special attack of this weapon, you can drain enemies' health. Nice.
Oh, cool.
So that's a fun thing that you can do with, and there's a couple of other weapons which sort of imply that it might do the same thing. And again, everything's blood themed. It's just a nice way to keep it like fully on theme, on brand with Bloodborne.
It's very on brand. It's very on brand.
Yeah.
So
The poor enemy being impaled on the rightmost diagram.
I didn't even notice the frowny face.
he's sad. But yeah, you can see how it would be a cool weapon to use, and it's got like all that fun motion. This stuff is just a simple motion blur, but it adds so much to making it feel real.
Yeah, I could hear it.
Yeah, and you get like that big clonk and clang as it, like the metal parts move. Maybe like a fleshy squish as it stabs through.
That it ties in with like, hey, this is your reward for beating that boss. Now you get to kind of, it's a very Mega Man thing, honestly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The boss.
Because it feels so much better. It's like you haven't just progressed in terms of story or whatever. You've got a cool toy to play with now.
Yeah, the immediate toy reward is about as good as it gets.
Yeah. So yeah, moving on. The
Eclipse?
Exactly. So throughout the game, just like in the first, you've got like the blood moon progressing in the first game, and it gets closer and closer to the full red blood moon. That looks epic. Instead here, we're progressing closer to an eclipse. I just thought it was a really nice way to theme it, sort of to be in line with the first game. Obviously, it also has meaning to the story, but in this case, it meant for essentially just changing the sky a little bit and then doing some interesting color passes and stuff over the image to switch it up. Because I had... Difference. Yeah, exactly. It's like you get a totally different mood now, and because I had all the enemies on layers, I could get rid of those, put some blood in, something's happened, put a different enemy type in. Small edits, but it makes for a new image.
That's one of my favorite parts of Bloodborne, where you revisit an area and then you're completely shocked because now the enemies that are there are so much more difficult. The level feels so much more threatening, and everything about this image says that.
Exactly, and it just makes, it's like using the same space twice. It's a very efficient thing. It's something that games should certainly aim to do a lot, because you get more from the content you create. And certainly from my point of view, I wanted to get as much as I could from the work I put in already. And this was a great way to do that.
It's like when a classical piece or something makes an allusion to a thing or a theme, it brings it back. And while it might save time and save money, it's also just beautiful to listen to or look at.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a really good one, actually.
Yeah, it feels analogous to Bloodborne 1 being in Yargul the first time round after you go to Hypogean jail, as opposed to after you've beaten Rom. Going to Yargul Unseen Village when everything is like deeply, deeply messed up. That's sort of the vibes that I'm getting from this.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the same way, I allude to the fact that the insight mechanic just does more for making enemies difficult, but it's something that ticks up throughout the game. So you're also like seeing more spooky stuff. So that's that. And this is just some ideas that I thought would be worth including anyway. It essentially alludes to the fact that throughout the game, you'll have been finding other weapons. So I never got a chance to really develop these. I chucked them in anyway. Pincer shears. That's what you saw in the previous concept. Yeah. I couldn't find a good way to make it work particularly, but I put it in there anyway. Ceremonial pick, just something that is either like a standard sort of blade, but then you poke it out sideways and make it into like a piercing weapon where you swing it at people. This is the thing you saw in the first image, the feral Maquahuitl. I looked
is
up.
That how you pronounce that? Wow.
Yeah, Maquahuitl. That isn't a properly Aztec weapon. It's like the
are these
the one
like
people
those
know it
wooden?
for.
Are these like those wooden swords that they used?
Yeah, they describe it as a club, but it's covered with like shards of obsidian.
Yeah,
and
that's such a cool thing to draw a reference from. I've seen a couple, I think, recreations in museums. I don't know if I've seen a real one, but they're very brutal looking weapons and super specific.
Absolutely,
Yeah, that's really cool.
And like they totally look like the sort of thing that's gonna like cause a bunch of bleed damage. So again, on brand.
Nice.
And then
Really
above,
nice.
just a really cool weapon that I came across, the Urumi, which is just like this long sheet of metal, essentially. Presumably sharp on both sides, and I found a bunch of cool videos of people doing it kind of like as a performance, and they like whip it around super fast and jump over it and do all this crazy stuff. I feel like it could be a fun thing to sort of half whip, half sword. You can use it to kind of like perhaps do some sort of defensive move, and I didn't know what to call it, so leeching Urumi. Perhaps it also lets you steal health from enemies.
Cool. I just want to point out again the presentation here has that really nice vibe of old school sketches of travelers who would kind of sketch ideas that they're looking at.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because it looked like it sort of been sketched in by hand instead of going with the font, which I chose specifically because it looked like the original Bloodborne font. I just put in a font that I found at font somewhere, something that made it look like it was hand drawn, because otherwise it just didn't match. It felt very strange to have literal paper book, hand drawn ink sketches, and then like this perfectly kerned and what is it called, serifed font. It just didn't make sense. So yeah, a small change, but worth paying attention to in this case. Anyway, so describes what's happened, puts in extra information about as you're going through the city when it's slightly darker, you hear more things, the NPCs talking to you, things like that. Voices, like where there were just murmurs behind the door before, now you've got full conversations to have, and a little more information about mechanics to do with how like the dodging is now kind of an extended version of the parry, so perfectly timed dodges cause an enemy to stagger and stuff like that. So interesting things. It's kind of like I don't have to show any visuals for this stuff. I can just describe it, and it flashes some of that stuff out. It also describes the cannula usage. You would switch around with the D-pad just to make sure it's always on hand, and that's what lets you sort of specifically use a cannula for each fight. So in the same way you might switch between weapons before going into a combat scenario, you would switch between cannulas too. And then we get to a big awesome scene. So quickly before I go into it specifically, this is the image I was referring to when I'd learnt lessons from the previous one about over detailing, and I was like, I already know going into this that a bunch of it's going to be in shadow, so why would I put the detail there only to get rid of it? Let's just like make sure I get the important stuff in and then just let the rest of it disappear. And that worked. It made for making this image quite a bit faster than it would have otherwise been, and I think it feels very effective too.
Great hero shot, love it. I also love that you posed the hunter in the classic Bloodborne pose for this one. It feels very I like that allusion just to the straight up iconic pose. Really everything about it feels moon presency. The people worshiping right before it feels like when you're going towards Orphan of Kaz at the end of the Hunter's Nightmare. I mean, a lot of great illusions there. I love this thing. This is so cool. And look, you don't have any healing, and you're low on health. That's
oh no!
I love that you saw that, because that was the first thing I was going to say. It's like my favorite detail is that you've run out of health and you're about to die, and
you're a son of a bitch.
You've only just made it. You just about made it to the lowest level of Loran.
Oh my god!
You found the big bad. I love that you saw that. Well done.
I also
gold star.
Thank you. And I also want to say even if we haven't like heard the straight up lore download, the images are very explicit, I think, in trying to communicate it. Again, like From does, that is their style. Like things are specific enough that the mind knows like, well, there's got to be something here, you know, like the fact that there's water here where there's nowhere else, lost ocean, just like I have my own guess as to what's going on here, which is that's not to be taken lightly. That's actually a very hard thing to draw out of a viewer. Most things don't make you care enough to want to guess anyway. So that's great.
Yeah, it's like presenting you with things that you haven't seen yet. So it's a bunch of new things at once. It's clearly important. And it's got stuff which, whether you knew what was going on or not, whether you read the text or not, you can at least make some link. You saw the sand draining away earlier. Now you see where the sand's draining too. And all of these things. So it pieces it together. Because this is the most sort of essentially important moment, this is where I chose to have the symmetrical composition. Because it was the one that deserved it, essentially. So other notes on the composition. It's a great image for describing what I've been calling checkerboarding with how you use light and shadow. And essentially, that's just if you've got a light chunk next to a dark chunk, if an object is standing on top, you can then make this pop out by making sure that the light extends up through it. And then almost like on a checkerboard, as soon as this shadow ends, I can just switch to shadow to make the rest of this figure stand out still. You've got to be careful. Yeah, you've got to be careful that this doesn't feel contrived. But in this case, I mean, the lighting is already, I guess you could describe it as contrived. It's very curated. And it works perfectly. You don't really notice it the first time, but it keeps the silhouette of this character, despite going across very high contrast background, very clear. And that's really nice. Again, you noticed already, but this is based on the cover art of the original. So I just wanted the same pose. This is the striking hunter pose, even though they're in different attire. It's supposed to just, really nail that this is a Bloodborne game. Make no mistake. Even though it's bright orange instead of like dark blues and greens. It's very much Bloodborne. And as far as making it look important without even knowing what's going on, because it's centrally composed and it's like you can tell something's happened here. There's blood dribbling down. It's like that doesn't just happen. Something's happened here, and there's like a clear focus. Everything's looking at this single point. So this is probably quite important. And that's sort of all I can really say on this image at the moment. And so cool.
I hope you win, dude.
Fingers crossed. I mean, I feel like successfully.
Good luck, everybody else. Like, seriously?
I think you definitely need to send him this video in some way, because the amount, I mean, just looking at it on face value, you get a lot out of it, but hearing you describe it and reading the passages, it's another level.
Right, there is a lot more beneath the surface.
Yeah.
And Vadi will read it all, or his judges, they seem very thorough, very, very thorough about whatever amount of work you do, they will look at all of it.
Yeah.
It seems, from what it looks like from the outside when he posts the win videos and all that, it really looks like they actually pay attention and care. So
it's great because they do like a reading of the lore as when they introduce the entry. And I mean, I sort of just can't wait to like hear his voice.
Oh, it's so good.
Just describe it, right? It would be so cool.
Did you submit it already?
That's the dream.
Did you submit this already, or is it?
Yeah, it's been submitted. It's
cool.
About 2.5, 3 weeks since submission. But I mean, there's got to be a lot of entries to go through and edit, video to edit.
It must take so long. Jeez.
I don't envy him. 1 second, I'm just gonna message to make sure I don't get interrupted because.
So, all of the three of us need to send it to Vadi. And then there won't be a competition, and then that'll be it. It'll be over really quickly.
Let's hope for that. That would be nice. Real quick, just message. Cool, that's good. All right, so we can continue. So then now we've got like the full transition in terms of to the Eclipse. Again, a nice image to make. I've got rid of all the creatures that they're not important anymore. What's happening is what this crazy stuff is in the sky. So I've taken the rest of like the sort of distractions away. There's the hint that like, from the beginning where it felt like the town was dead and lost. Oh, there's actually still stuff living here, still things, because you've been talking to people, sort of implies that they're sort of somehow coming back, or at least becoming more present somehow. That sort of tie into maybe the lore reasons, but it's just a nice change. And so this would be like your last journey through this area towards the boss fight at the end. And a detail that I could have put in but forgot, I didn't show that the chest has been opened. Oh, that's a shame. Well.
Invalidates everything. You should rescind your submission.
I'm only human, Anyway, and then this
person just did a no chest run.
No chest run, exactly. They just never picked up the tendon saber.
Dude, this shot.
So the end there. Here's the final shot.
Oh, the great one's nightmare. Oh, it's so enticing. Please,
please. So here we go. I just wanted to make this feel as epic as possible. Obviously, we're fighting the great one that you've just seen before. We've got the big epic mood setting. The eclipse is fully in the sky. In the same way that you see this really cool shot of the moon presence descending from the blood moon. I didn't have the same sort of descending from the sky, but originally I had the eclipse kind of maybe this size over in this portion of the image. And originally I was like, yeah, it's the standard kind of triangle composition. You've got the focal point here, the character, and then the eclipse that's going on. But it felt very separate. It felt like it wasn't part of the action. It was just sort of like mood setting. And I wanted it to be very explicit that in the same way the moon presence is linked to the moon, this great one, which I'm calling fauna, in the same way that the moon presence is called flora. Fauna is very much from the eclipse, or at least connected to it. When the eclipse is there, the sun presence or the eclipse presence or whatever you'd call it, I didn't end up writing that because it felt a bit wordy, but it's here as well. So linking those two together just made it feel that much stronger, and it made sense to then have this huge eclipse in the sky, which obviously works very well in this image too. This did pose problems for the composition. Everything's dark. I've got like a largely sort of black character against a sky which is supposed to be black with just like a ring of light. So there's a lot of contrivance going on in terms of lighting. Where's all this blue fog coming from? Doesn't matter. The point is,
it can't matter. You got to make the picture. It's all
exactly. There's no way to make the image without it. So I was sort of happy to just let that sort of stuff slide and really focus on just making the image feel epic from your first read. You're in a nightmare too. So like you said before, in the same way that FromSoft has put a lot of like interesting lighting effects in their environments, I totally had free reign to just do whatever I wanted to make it themed nicely. And you're no longer in the waking world. You're in the Great One's nightmare. So this sort of stuff, you can do whatever you want with it.
Dark pictures are really hard. Yeah, you got to do whatever it takes. It looks very complete for such a dark picture. And like you said, I mean, even when you're running around in any From game, or I guess I'm thinking specifically Bloodborne and Dark Souls, it's like there's contrived lighting everywhere, right? There's like local light sources that are coming from nothing, like the emitters are turned off. They're just there to light a corner or to get like a temperature difference from one side of an object to another. But those light sources aren't necessarily coming from anywhere. They're just like a stylistic, like make it clear to the player thing.
And that's the thing. The first read then feels so much more engaging because of it. So stuff in this image, obviously the same architecture that I've shown from Loran already. It's a different place in the upper levels of Loran, but we've got like the cool temples and stuff. A more explicit sort of Aztec reference there, just because I thought it would be good to get a little bit of that in. But the rest of it is just architecture that we'd seen previously. The player in this case, literal black silhouette. I didn't have time to do anything more, but I also had already learnt my lesson of like, I don't actually need to detail it. It doesn't matter. It was a good lesson to learn. Up here, just a few of these like nice little glowing bits. It sort of links back a little bit to Abriatus, the daughter of Cosmos, like the sort of more alien look in the design. I wanted to make sure it wasn't referencing the moon presence completely. It was like a sort of a mix between the two. And also it offers that very nice contrast with the sort of pinkish red in the back. And otherwise it's a pretty simple image. It's just I'm doing as much as I can to make it feel really intense and interesting. I've got a lot of effects. In this case, you've just entered a fight, so you have full health, but you have just dodged backwards, and so you have less stamina. So you just done a dodge, and you've got like this big swoop as the arms sort of come across. I think this could have been more effective, but the a composition to really focus on like the swipe of an enemy would have been completely different to this. And I really just wanted to make sure that the silhouette was cool.
I imagine you're going to get a lot of messages from indie developers wanting you to join their project.
Yeah, so if you just want to like say
cool.
your rate for the record, that would probably be cut out a lot of emails.
High, very high.
Very high. Because you're already working as a professional
Indeed.
artist.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Anyway, something else that I was aware of when I added the UI in is that it was too bright and it just took away from the scene. So that's something to be aware of. Absolutely break the rules on like pre-established UI. I took the blood echoes and insight thing away. It was just extra confusion up in this portion of the image. We don't need it. And I've made this this is like half the opacity it used to be. Same with the stuff at the top. It just needs to be lessened. Of course, you picked up the Queen's Canyon in the previous image, so now you've got that equipped, and you've got maximum number of blood sacks because you're just going into a boss fight. And then
Carol runes for that?
Pardon?
No, it's a joke because you can get +3 or whatever. Yeah.
Oh, can you? Oh, damn.
Yeah.
See, I missed out on it. Anyway, so then we've got the final screen, which describes everything that got you to that place, what happens when you go to the altar, a little item description that I just didn't have time to put into its own item screen, but it doesn't matter too much because it's only a small bit. And then descriptions of the ending, and then the alternate ending. And that's it. That is the piece.
Wait, I want to read the alternate ending. Give me a second.
And
Because I still haven't even finished the first Bloodborne.
Oh.
So I get to experience all that. And then, I don't know. It's fun to think about this as a possibility for another game.
Yeah.
how familiar are you with the first game's endings? And also, are you concerned about spoilers?
I guess I'll probably say spoiler warning at the beginning of this video when I do the intro. I've already seen all the endings and all the lore stuff, so
Yeah. The game's been out for a while anyway, so it's not like
It has.
I'm sure anyone who's still trying to hold out would know not to watch something about it.
yeah.
the literal
Also,
sequel,
The whole intro to this kind of spoils the good ending anyway, so
Yeah, exactly. It's immediately.
Yeah.
I mean,
The
if you didn't know it existed, then you'd be like, "What the hell's going on?" But yeah.
yeah, you just wake up from the dream, right?
Just wake up from the
Yep.
dream. Cool. So that's gone through the first pass, I guess, just describing my general approach to it. Shall we jump into some deep lore?
Well, I just want to
let-
say, great job on all the art, Thomas. It was
incredible.
it was incredible. I hope everybody who some amount of people are going to be like, all right, I'm not sticking around for lore, but I hope that they really love the art because just on its face, it feels, even if you don't have any connections to past lore stuff, the kind of story that it's trying to tell, the pieces as a whole feel very cohesive and make their point super clearly and just really do a great job of communicating. So just big kudos to you. Super props.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I suppose last thoughts on that as a whole. Looking at all the images at once is again a great way to just sort of get an idea for the ebb and flow of your entry. So at the end, I was thinking, how do I organize these images? Because there's places where I could have switched around the order, and you can see I kind of group areas where it demands your attention to read and then sort of digest like stuff that's not happening in the moment separately. I've kind of grouped them together so that you have, say, your like item description with some info about what's just happened. Again, another item description thing with a weapon, and this just sort of meant it felt a little less like whiplash between the two sides that I was presenting. Because initially I could have sort of been like, okay, you start the game and you get some blood sacks, and it immediately shows you the blood sack thing, and it's like, okay, cool. But it's much nicer to show this full sequence because you get to experience this all together. It's much closer to sort of the visual experience you'd have playing something like this. And so just keeping all of that in mind, if it's not perfectly chronological, but it feels like it flows better in terms of how it's delivering information to whoever's viewing it, I think that's always more important. So
Right on.
Yeah. Also,
Cool.
nice
Well-
variety of images, like lighter ones at the beginning, mid-tone ones, things that have more of a dusk feeling, going all the way to like totally dark, nighttime, scary images. Nice, just overall variety when you look at them all at thumbnails. It doesn't feel like it's the same beat being hit over and over again. Really.
Yeah, and some of that is deliberate, but a lot of that kind of came naturally. It's like I would have probably thought to put it in deliberately if it wasn't happening itself, but because I already had this idea of the progressing sunset, like that naturally means I'm going from light to dark across the period of the game. So some of it happens for you, but absolutely keeping that in mind is great, because otherwise you may just miss out on the chance to do it. And something I also describe in some of the descriptions is how, like, the lower down you go, so essentially the further you progress, the sand sort of becomes more like a blood red sand rather than this bright yellow, and those sort of things. They kind of show through in images like this. And we do get darker and more red until the end, where it's just like black and red, basically, versus the beginning where we've got like white and red almost. So it's like this nice opposite from where you've started.
That progression is really effective. And just with these images alone as key scenes, if they were cut together in a trailer, I think many people would be very excited to play this game.
Yeah, I suppose that also touches another point. If you're going to do something which exemplifies like an entire project, absolutely make sure you pick the things that are the most interesting. Like, you may always think, yeah, I'll show the final boss, but the moment before the final boss, that's just as cool. Like, and maybe not as obvious. It wouldn't immediately occur to you, but just the way that you approach the bosses in the Souls games, or the Soulsborne games, they always stage them in such interesting ways. And it's easy to forget that kind of thing if, I guess, you're not doing the research beforehand to work out what they've already done and why it works so well. So, yeah, just a good tip to sort of remain mindful of that sort of stuff.
Cool. So I think from here, lovely images, great everything, as Steven said. We could dive into that Miro board, and I think that's where you have the lore stuff. And if you want to just run us through that, I'm sure we'd all love to kind of hear the story beats that you had in mind.
Absolutely. So this is probably the most important part of my board. It was these aspects to keep, like, every time I would go back in, I'd read a bit. Like, I'd sort of scan through to make sure I'm hitting these parts, and then I basically extend that out to ideas that could take me to where I need to go. So I took this one little line here, so this red one from earlier, I just copied that over and started to work out what this might mean. So this led through random ideas, which are almost like high level ideas that don't have too much direct connection yet. And so, yeah, we had the potential for a prequel, maybe time travel there. And then I could sort of briefly run that through my mind and see, like, what vibe do I get from this, and what potential is there and what doesn't work about it. And clearly this worked for me. I immediately had like a little burst of ideas that could work. And these were just the three endings and where that could have taken you. So if I want the first game to feel important, then essentially I want to make sure it's a prequel and it makes sense after one of the endings. I can't have it happen after all of the endings, because that would imply a sort of something which is quite separate to the events of the first game. Sure, it may be chronological, but it feels like it doesn't matter whether you did X or Y in the first game. And since the third ending is the most difficult one to get, essentially, it's the most fulfilling, it gets you to the most interesting space, I'm taking that to be the canon one. So that gives you some things to sort of start with. If I want that to feel engaging and meaningful, well, that means I want the Infant Great One to play a part in the second story. You could play as the Great One. Well, possibly, but that might just stray too far away, be a bit too alien. Perhaps it would work if you made an entire game, like people may enjoy it, but trying to convince you that it would feel good to play as a Great One in just visual images, I thought would be too challenging and sort of too out there for a contest like this. So
I love that you're actually writing out your realistic crits of your own ideas. I think that's very good practice.
It's really useful, because otherwise you just forget, and you look back and you know, wait a second, why didn't I go with that? You know, that sounds cool on the face of it, and if you don't have a reason why not, you can get kind of like it's getting rid of the mental blockers. I mean, to be honest, listen to Ahmed's stuff about just essentially your approach to art in general, and the tricks your mind will play on you to prevent you from doing the stuff you know you want to do. Writing things down is the best way to like
That's great.
break that barrier. So I have all of these different places that it could go through. I think ultimately I take this path. So Kenny causes a new event to happen, and I then start to draw in aspects of the lore. So there's the description about how every Great One loses its child and yearns for a surrogate. We now have a baby Great One. I was like, put the two together. Maybe there's a Great One that's a bit unhappy and it would like to have a baby. Wouldn't that be cute? Perhaps a slight departure from the general depressing tone of most Soulsborne games, but the undercurrent, or the story sort of underneath the game I'm proposing is almost have this nice like Hollywood happy ending, kind of. So it's slightly different, but it actually draws, I think, quite accurately from all the stuff that happens in the first game. So I think it's arguably quite a nice extension. And I like it to have a slightly happier edge, because that just suits me, I think. It ties a nice bow on it. This would be the second game and the last game. It would solve the problems to some extent. Through this route, there's links to Loran. Specifically, there's the description of the bastard of Loran, which is that little like shriveled looking sort of infant thing that it describes how it's cursed, and it was found in ailing Loran. And it's called
most annoying chalice dungeon material.
Oh really? Is it quite rare?
It drives me. It's at a point in the chalice dungeons where you just need so many materials to progress that it's just on this list of like, really, I have to get these guys again, all 5 of these guys, come on.
It's just like grinding again, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, their name is very interesting because it implies illegitimate birth. So that sort of triggered a little memory of reading about the Ring of Betrothal, which is talking about how a queen would sort of wear the ring to represent wedlock with a Great One that had permitted those slated to bear a special child. So perhaps all of the Bastard Loran are a result of them being illegitimate, as in a child born outside of wedlock with a Great One. Again, it's sort of like, these are links that there's nothing sort of stating them in the original game, but there's multiple little lore descriptions which feel like they could fit together. So perhaps we have Loran, which is, I can't remember exactly why I settled on that as a place, but I think it's just because it felt like the most intriguing. There's just enough hints to it that make it feel like it's a big expansive place, but there's also not enough to make it feel too limiting or too much like it's been explored already. And now I've got these sort of ideas with the Bastard of Loran mixing with the Ring of Betrothal. An idea is starting to form.
I like that connection a lot. That's cool.
Yeah. So this lays the groundwork. I now have Loran that we know was lost to the sands. We know that it was, I can't remember exactly where this is from. Again, another description, but we know it was the first place to suffer the Scourge of the Beast. Because it was the first place, I extrapolated that to being the origin of the Scourge of the Beast. That's really just like, why not? There's nothing that counteracts that idea, and then that leads me to have a story that I can make from it. And yeah, the Bastards of Loran exist in this space, so something happened that caused a bunch of Bastards of Loran to exist, because you collect quite a few in the main game. There sort of feels like there should be a justification. And it provides that nice justification. So I started to work out roughly what might have happened to get to the present state of Loran. And then I was working out roughly what will happen in the game for events to happen that feel meaningful and get to some sort of result. The stuff up here, this is really just me noting interesting like tidbits, things that I think might come into use. I don't think a lot of them did. For example, I have quite a lot of stuff to do with the Thumerians, like which ones exist in the game and what they do in the game and in the lore. It ultimately didn't matter too much. I kind of ignored it. But these are really just things that I made sure I kept track of because they felt like they were interesting things that pointed in a direction that wasn't explained. So it's like, it feels inspirational when you read it almost. And this is kind of just like a gut feeling. It's like, oh, that's cool, but also unknown. So it's something I can work with. Whereas when it describes something that is cool, but also expanded on, that's not something I can work with. So a good example is that I don't make really any references to the actual church, the Blood Healing Church, because that's Yharnam specific. That's all stuff that's happened after Loran, and it feels separate, and it's really well expanded already. You've got the 3 divisions of it, and you've got these individual characters that all have their own motivations and stuff. It's really cool, but referencing that would make it feel like it's really sort of stuck in the first game's world, and therefore I could ignore it. But all the things that are external to those events, that's where I could draw inspiration from.
I think you made a good call there. I think that was a very good call. Cool.
So yeah, and then leading on from that, here's one thing that Loran has linked to it. It's described as the harbinger of curses. And elsewhere, curses, I think it's the Chalice Dungeon description. It says how like curses are brought down by the Great Ones or something. I might have the actual description somewhere, but it implies that the Great Ones are the origins of curses. Curses are used to hex individuals or something like that. That's their function in the game. But because that's described as a curse, and multiple times the Scourge of the Beast is described as a curse, I'm like, maybe again I do a little put the two together. A Great One is the source of the Scourge of the Beast. Perhaps it cursed humanity with it after humanity did something that they weren't too pleased with. That sort of aligns with how Kos has like cursed the fishing hamlet and things because of the atrocities that happened there. So it starts to feel consistent, and also like it's drawing from pretty reasonable links that existed in this place. One thing that I liked as an idea but couldn't execute on, I don't know if you remember that sketch I had earlier where it showed like that big sort of squishy thing in the ceiling. I always wanted to do a Heart of Loran, so like another sort of squishy amalgamation creature, because I was reading
Brain of Mensis.
Exactly.
Nice.
Because there are theories and stuff discussing about how the Brain of Mensis is assumed to be the school of Mensis. They did the ritual, they all died. You see all of them in their like head cages and things, but the Brain of Mensis sort of feels like it's probably just like an amalgamation of all of their consciousnesses into this big, disgusting, evil thing.
It certainly feels important, even if it's hard to put a finger on it, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And so I was like, ooh, it could be cool to do a similar thing here. And with Loran as like a whole population, perhaps that could have been like an interesting way to create something which was, instead of like the pursuit of knowledge, it was like the pursuit of a nice thing, something that comes from the heart, compassion perhaps. And so they fuse into this big, poor heart creature. The other idea which I couldn't execute on was like, it would be fun to have a boss that is covered in ticks, which is like weakening it actively. But you could do something beforehand to like get rid of the ticks, and then the boss becomes a lot stronger because it's not like hampered by that. So it could have just been like an interesting idea that I could have taken somewhere, but ultimately didn't have time for. So yeah, back to the board. Essentially, that roughly describes where I'm getting all these ideas from. I wanted an equivalent to the moon presence. So, what's cooler than a blood moon? Solar eclipse. It's a bit of a bigger solar event. It's rarer. It also looks cool. Great. I could extrapolate from that. The first game is set about seeking the pale blood. I could put like seek the ring of blood or something. Something which is again a vague reference to the visual of the eclipse, which in my case, instead of going white, I went for obviously red. It should look blood themed. And so in the same way, it's like seek this thing. This thing is analogous with this Great One. just like it is in the first game. It just felt like a nice sort of mirror of it, a nice parallel. Something worth pointing out that I didn't before. It has a ring of betrothal on because I could.
Oh, he's married.
He's married.
I had noticed the ring, but I didn't know it was the ring of betrothal. That's a cool detail.
It requires quite a bit of zooming in, but who knows? Perhaps.
I knew it was a ring, and I meant to ask, but it just slipped my mind after we moved past it.
Yeah. And so this is the sort of research I did into here, just finding interesting words and associations with it. If you just Google and like read the Wikipedia and then read historical references to it, it starts to give you just fun ideas of like how historians have referenced it through time. And then all of this stuff, this is just like a really nice chunk of text I found somewhere that was describing how past civilizations saw it and, you know, what they thought it was. You know, you've got all of these fun things like star demons eating the sun, insects or snakes. Like these are just little tidbits that came from those this chunk of text, and it's about how the Aztecs like thought of these solar events, which could be taken in very cool ways. So all of this stuff, it's kind of just, it's more of the like blue sky research, just finding interesting references that I could take forward. Didn't use too much of it in the end, but it's a great place to start. And it also, you know, I think the reason people thought Aztec might be the setting is just because their culture was so ingrained in like blood sacrifice and all that fun stuff. So it was an immediate fit for Bloodborne. So yeah, I then move over to this. This is where I just work out exactly what will happen in the game, and this is very fun. Largely before I did any drawing, maybe when I was doing the sketches at the same time, I would just work out things that I wanted in the game and then extrapolated on it. So
what first a benchmark for how hard you should work.
Yeah.
How long did you work on this again? How long did you say it took since you started on it to submission?
So we had a month. So for me, I was like, okay, I've got like four or five weekends and whatever I can do in the evenings. And the problem was I hadn't planned for the fact that I was actually busy for 2 of those weekends. So that suddenly put a big strain on what I could do.
It's a
pretty this in a month.
It's a pretty tight deadline, and then I think a lot of people on that deadline, they would have been like, I can't plan, you know, I can't make a huge board and actually write out what I want to do. Like, you got to plan it. And damn, any amount of time you can spend writing out, just writing good content, right? Like this all comes down to content creation before pictures, before layout. It's content creation. It's what is the actual meat, the actual content of what's going on. It's like enough can't be said about actually taking the time to write that out and make that real.
Absolutely. And the other thing is I didn't know the scope of the project really until I had done this. So I kind of had no idea how much I wanted to make until I had come up with the ideas of things I wanted to make. That sounds like a very obvious sentence, but it really did sort of, it blossomed out of enjoying brainstorming in this sheet completely separate from visual art. And then obviously I then just wanted to try and represent as much of this as possible with visuals. So this is where I made a little gameplay node, and this meant I could just write out stuff where I liked mechanics from the original game and I wanted to innovate on them. So how do I innovate on the healing? Well, I end it with the blood sacs and cannulas. All of that seemed to fit because I was looking at what sort of stuff might exist in a desert, what kind of creatures are there, and what things would just be a nice departure from the wolf sort of inspired beasts of the first game. So I was like, if I go for more insectoid, like exoskeletons and pincers and stuff like that, things like the scorpions and insects felt like a nice departure from that. So it meant that everything would feel sort of similarly horror-esque with the merging with animal reference, but it wasn't the same beasts that we've been fighting in the first game over and over. So I came up with that. I was sort of brainstorming a lot of this stuff. It's nice because having written the things out here, at some point I was just copying chunks of this into the text descriptions I have in the final presentation, and then just rewording it to make it flow. So it made that final step of bringing it all together really easy. I was just finding the bits from here, copying them into Photoshop. Easy peasy.
Nice.
So that was really nice. It meant that I didn't have to try and write all of that in one chunk at the end. And then I wanted the doll. The thing the first game does amazingly, and all of FromSoft's games seem to do, is that it explains why you can die and come back to life. Very few games do this. and make a deal about it. Like the first game I really loved for that was Undertale. It doesn't explain like sort of a mechanic in the world sort of as to why you should be coming back to life and stuff, but it then expands on the consequences of you dying and coming back, and what that means for a story. That's awesome. It's like the sort of the meta aspect, but it also makes sense for the in-game stuff. FromSoft never really goes meta with it. It never goes, you just died, time to reload your save kind of thing. Instead, it goes for an in-world reason. And in this case, it's that your consciousness is bound to the dream. And so if you die, it's just a physical thing. Your consciousness goes back to the dream. That's where you're being sustained. Cool. Well, you end the dream in the first game. So where are you with developing the second game? I just went with the easy option. New dream. Call it a different name. The Hunter's Reverie. In this case,
I think it makes perfect sense. Just to quickly ask you, do you think the pillars in the distance in the Hunter's dream are other dreams? Do you know where you lie on that theory?
I sort of yes, I would say I would go with that because of like in the same way that your dream has like all the graves of maybe previous players. You know, that's kind of the idea of like these are all hunters that were controlled by other players and stuff.
Yeah, I feel that way too. I feel like there's more. I feel like it makes sense if there's more than one dream. You know, like when Eileen tells you like, say hi to the little doll for me after she kills you. It's like that. It feels like there could be more than one doll. It feels like this whole thing could be being instanced. It feels like being a hunter is like an experience that's not necessarily monolithic. Like there can be multiple versions of it going on. Okay, sorry, I went down a rabbit hole.
No, that's a good point. I think my interpretation, at least of how it fits into this, would be that there's still only one hunter at a time, probably, but I'm not sure. I think that could go either way. Definitely the fact that you're like cycles of hunters is basically just all the different players. But yeah, I'd never really expanded it to being like sort of parallel hunts going on. Just because I suppose in the first game, all of your actions are so singular. Like you are the first one to successfully kill Margot's wet nurse, for example. And that's sort of what ends the dream. So or at least burns down the hunter's workshop. So yeah, I think it also just keeps it easier to like keep track of when it's just one thing happening. So at least for this, and we're taking the interpretation that there's only one hunter at a time at the very least. Anyway, so the Hunter's Reverie that I designed, my idea for the start of this is just that in the same way you appear from a faraway land and you want to use blood healing in the first game. In this case, you're injured, you've come from somewhere that has suffered some sort of tragedy, and for whatever reason that has left you alone and stumbling through a desert. I went for a kind of African inspiration for the player character, just because it was very different to a Victorian from the first game, but also separate kind of from my interpretation of Loran. And he has the African Kapinga, which is one of those just crazily shaped tribal weapons. Very cool, and I've sort of put in all of those patterns into their clothing. So the dream here, it's quite similar architecture, but it's just a little different. It's more of that like soft rounded clay construction. This is supposed to basically be the doll has found you. You're like essentially a potential help. She needs someone to help her enact whatever plan she has, and she can heal you, save you, and also hopefully benefit from your skills, I suppose. You appear to be a warrior, so it kind of explains your fighting ability, at least at the beginning.
Sounds like the doll's MO.
Yeah, and so she takes you to a new dream. She essentially creates it. She has the Infant Great One with her. The Infant Great One is kind of replacing the Moon Presence, so it's totally justifiable that they together somehow can make a new dream. And they make it in the image of your hometown, or something like that. It's supposed to invoke, like, this is kind of like a comforting place for you. She kind of wants to convince you, I suppose, of join my side, I'm good. So it's sort of formed in your image rather than in the first game, German's. And therefore, so instead of being like a hunter's workshop, because that doesn't really exist anymore, this is just sort of analogous to your home. And you see her in here. She's got the the pram with her, and the pram's kind of like a makeshift construction. The base of it is the wheelchair that German sits in. It's just got like a canopy over the top.
Nice.
So it was another little link. It's a little less obvious because you never really look at the wheelchair.
That's subtle, but it's cool.
But it's another nice addition. And yeah, there's Infant Great One sort of poking its little tentacles out. The thing that the description here refers to is how essentially you approach. She doesn't like attack, but if you sort of engage, then she'll become very defensive of the pram, and then like you have some little sort of scripted like fight dance thing, and she'll just incapacitate you. A thing I wanted to just put more ideas in for is the idea of insight. If you get more insight, the game becomes harder but more rewarding. And so this first fight, you're supposed to just lose and quickly be overpowered and taken to the Hunter's Dream. But like second playthrough or something, if you like manage to dodge around for long enough, she essentially starts using Eldritch attacks. So that's why she would like you would see some of the tentacles pop out. And because of that, you gain insight. You see something, you're like, what the hell? Why has she got tentacles now? You gain some insight. It's like essentially a boost for hard mode. So at the beginning of the game, you manually set the game to hard mode by doing something like this.
Oh, that's cool. It's in the gameplay. Yeah, that's nice.
And then a similar thing that I put in the text is how the various interactions you can have with her in this space. So at the beginning, you can like run over to this and like spam X on it or whatever it is. And she'll be like, don't look at that. And if you keep like spamming it, she'll refuse for a while until she's like, okay, fine. And you look at it and like, I don't know, lose a bunch of health as you get shocked by whatever you see inside. But
you get
also
frenzied immediately.
Yeah, you get frenzied immediately, basically. But you gain a bunch of insight. So it's like, again, just another way that you can boost that at the beginning, put yourself in hard mode, and it's more interesting, more rewarding. Also, I don't know if you read through the bit at the end, like my ending of the game. The true ending is something which is unlocked just by having enough insight when you get to the end. So it's assumed that these are prerequisites of like being able to beat the game. Unless you just spend a bunch of time grinding or something, this is the way you get the necessary insight to get the true ending, the intended ending.
Nice. So that's cool.
It's sort of
right there at the beginning. That's really cool.
Yeah, exactly. And it's again like an optional hard mode in the same way that you like start Dark Souls with the classes. You can choose the Knight and you're going to have an easier time than choosing the Depraved, which is literally just hard mode. You start with nothing. Your stats suck. That's hard mode. They just don't call it that.
Super cool.
This has been such a treat.
Love the fish to reference the Lost Ocean thing.
Yes, so things to do with oceans. Large bodies of water are bulwarks of truth. So essentially barriers to truth. That's the description of Rom, something to do with Rom, and why you kill Rom, and then you can see the you gain access to I forget. Yahagul. That's it, yeah. So
something guarding sleep.
Yeah.
Can you go back to the doll real quick? Is her face cracked, like the porcelain?
Yes.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, so I put in that as just and the same with like kind of how a bit beaten up and scruffy she is here. Like, she's been alone trying to defend her little baby. Not her baby, but like her companion. It just adds a bit to the like, she's still frail despite having the power of the little infant great one to use when she needs it. I didn't want it to look like, why are you helping her when she could just go and do this thing on her own? There needs to be a little bit more justification as to like, she's looking for someone to try and help her in this new quest of hers.
Wow.
Quickly on the topic of oceans, just because we touched on it. This is a slightly modified version of the deep sea rune. It's upside down, like an ocean that used to be there but isn't now. And also it's shaped a little more like the Hunter's Mark, just because I could. I don't know how obvious that is or not, but that's like the main rune that I then have just sort of spattered around.
It's pretty subtle, but that's from MO, so it fits. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty subtle
I
one.
thought it was a kind of like a scorpion at first.
It does look a bit scorpion-like,
Top
doesn't it?
down.
That works too.
Yeah. So you said we'll be talking about those teeth things.
Yeah, so essentially I wanted this to feel like oddly living. This desert, which is still somehow like a strange source of blood. Like it's bleeding still. It's like injured, and it's also referencing to the fact that it used to be an ocean. So this whole place would have been
white sands, blood, and coral. It's such an interesting 3-part idea.
It's a cool combination. And yeah, this place, Loran, used to be surrounded by ocean or lakes or something like that, which meant that the people living there just peacefully lived by with no knowledge of the eldritch truths beneath them. At some point that dries up or drains away. It causes like famine or something like that. Hence, Loran is ailing. So that's my kind of like justification. That's what kicks off the events there. So the city's ailing, the water's gone, like maybe people are starving or disease is rife, something like that. And so the queen of Loran, again, extrapolation, I think it's referenced somewhere that there was a queen, but just in the way that Yharnam was the queen of the Pthumerians, it felt appropriate. And we've got the queen of our bloods. Like, why not have another queen? It just feels like it fits. She resides with the people, and she wants to save them. So she's like offered some sort of deal. Perhaps a Pthumerian priest shows up. And like in general, the people there are sort of becoming more aware of the strange happenings, because the bulwark of truth, the thing that's blocking the truth, has basically gone. The large body of water, the ocean, it's disappeared, or at least it's sunk further into the ground. But it used to be there.
It makes so much sense.
Yeah, it's like it just fits together so nicely. So
as someone who has always remembered that particular line about water from Bloodborne, it really it works for me. If someone missed that line, that might be like, seems like a stretch, but I always like that stuff.
And that's why using the mirage, firstly, it's what happens when you're in a hot desert, but also it gives the implication of ocean. It's like it looks like there's a body of water there, but there isn't. Perhaps it's because there used to be a body of water there, but now there isn't. So I was just like, that's such a nice inclusion. That's one of the reasons I was switching up the composition, because you need to have a flat horizon for that to work. But I still wanted this tangent just to make sure that all of these lines were like making a nice sort of motion towards a pinch on this right-hand side, because that's the direction she's traveling. Anyway, so that explains all that stuff in the beginning. The strange sort of desert that's bleeding, and the Ixodida, it describes somewhere in here about how they feed on the blood of the desert and those forlorn children who are born out of wedlock. So that's in reference to the bastards of Loran. I think this was literally just because it was being discussed in another video, but someone was talking about how, it's interesting, the bastards of Loran were like, they were ailing, they had some problem with them that was, either causing them to die or just the result of their fate or something like that. And they don't appear to be affected by the scourge of the beast. So they didn't die because of that. But also they look totally drained, like they have no blood in them. It could just be because they're old. But I was like they could have just been sucked dry from the Ixodida that are now like preying on the old city. So that seemed to fit quite nicely. The blood that they contain here, it should be healing in some capacity. Like the blood vials in the original game, they are presumably made by the blood ministers, so they have some old blood in them. That's why they can heal you. It's never really explained, I don't think. I never saw reference to that, but it's assumed, and there needs to be a sort of reason why this blood is also special. So I'm thinking that essentially these children, their pregnancies were doomed through a reason that I'll describe later, but it was attempted to like save them. They tried to use the blood of the old ones to save them, and it failed, but they ended up having that blood within them. So all the Ixodida that have been sucking that up the ground, firstly, it's made them grow huge and monstrous, but also it contains old blood. Same with the blood from the desert. So that's why it can heal you. Otherwise, it's just like I felt like it was something that leaving unexplained just felt lazy, or at least it was missing a vital component of why you used blood vials in the first game rather than any blood. So that was why I did that, and it felt like maybe there wasn't enough blood to go around from just these poor infants. So I was like, let's have the desert bleed as well. That's cool.
Yeah. At least it's a big move, you know. It makes a big statement, right? Instead of like trying to like kowtow on it and make a small statement. It's like
Exactly.
it's really a big part of the environment. So I think that makes it work.
Yeah, and it just looks cool. It's like otherwise it's that one step to make a desert feel more Soulsborne-y than not. You know, you need to use as much as possible because it's such an otherwise like unfamiliar place, unfamiliar setting for this type of game.
So real quick, I do have to get going pretty soon. This is, I'm not sure how much more you wanted to kind of cover. If you do want to like kind of just cram everything in the next 15 minutes,
I'll try that.
Yeah, 'cause I don't want to cut you short, but it's like I do have to get going.
Cool.
Yeah. We'll see.
Yeah, Thomas. If you would just do like it'd be great to just hear like Med said, your quick 10-minute just this is the thing.
I will cover just what happens. Yeah.
I would also recommend maybe considering like, because you did so much work, like you could make like a PDF and post that with your stuff, and the people who really want to do the full deep dive, they'll do it. Like there was a lot of people in the early Bloodborne community who just made basically books about the lore. So
yeah, true.
You know, it's a very lore interested community. So you could also just do a piece of writing there.
I think that'd be good. I just need to surround each image with like, these are the starting points. These are all the lore items, descriptions that exist, and this is what I read from them. Yeah, good idea. So, is one of you leaving now? James, are you leaving?
No, not now. Oh,
cool. Yep.
Yeah, Dropbox, WeTransfer. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks for joining, man.
Bye,
all right.
James. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
I can do another 10 minutes. So
cool.
if you
I will do that.
Download there, then I'll be here.
I can do that. Download that like full cover of like the important stuff because I've got stuck in the small details already. So the city was lost to sands. You know, that kept it hidden for ages. I describe how there's like some big disturbance. Essentially, this is just triggered by the doll and the infant great one get closer. You know, that's enough of a presence to disturb the great one that's been sleeping below the city for ages. And so, big disturbance. Something opens up presumably, and all the sand drains down. And hence, I've just like a bit of reference to that, but also I've described it in these descriptions. It's a cool way to make it, you know, there's a reason it's been discovered now versus earlier. So then going through, this was something which I'd put in earlier, but just to hammer home the idea that this is where the Scourge of the Beast started, and they were already like making trick weapons to try and deal with it, crafted by the Loranites in their desperate fight against the growing Scourge. Cool. The idea was just the beasts and things, like perhaps trying to incapacitate them rather than just kill them outright, like, you know, sever their limbs or something to keep them from moving, because at this point their friends and families transformed to a beast, but they have no idea if they're going to be able to save them or not. So it felt like maybe like an extra edge to making this weapon specifically.
That's really cool. That's really cool.
Then this is sort of supposed to be modeled around something that might have been like a nursery or something. Like it's got the imagery of places you would like keep children, or perhaps a place of birth. And so this is where you find all the ticks, because they've just been sucking up on that blood to survive or to grow. I know, nice and evil and edgy, so and again, very Soulsborne-y. So that's the setting for this piece. It's why you find the midwife's cannula here. Cool, makes sense. The midwife's cannula is specific in that it's like slower but greater health restoration. You know, it's one of the more powerful ones. And here we describe some extra stuff. So attempts to aid the ill-fated gestations with miraculous blood were in vain. The ailing infants were born malformed and sickly translucent red. So this is just another reference to the red jelly, which is another weird item that you find in the first game. Just like a nice way to sort of contextualize why they exist. and what might have caused it. And then the subjects of Loran were pitifully ignorant to their celestial ayahs. So this is just describing like the great ones that were basically existed below the city or just somewhere, but had been hidden for so long by the ocean. And then as the sky darkened, the beastly fear within them erupted. So it's just talking about how the beast, the curse of the beast, is kind of like drawing out an aspect of mankind that's already there, but sort of has yet to show itself for whatever reason. And it's sort of nice that the curse that the Great One sort of puts across humanity is it's sort of based in something that exists within them already, but it just sort of brings it out and makes it physical, makes it a physical change. As the sky darkened, obviously, is just referring to the progressing eclipse. So we go forward a bit, and the sort of the thing that happened in Loran in history is that the Queen made some sort of like deal with, like, I think I describe it how like a Thumerian priest shows up and offers this deal. Essentially, it's saying, look, we can use blood healing for a price. So this will potentially save your people who are currently dying of starvation or illness. Again, that's just reference to the ailing city of Loran, which is how it's always described. And the deal is always for the Great One who has presumably lost its child or whatever, like the law says, and is desperately yearning for a surrogate. So it wants a queen like Yharnam to bear its child. So some sort of ceremony is performed. The queen is impregnated with the Great One's child, and as the pregnancy sort of progresses, the eclipse like slowly sort of progresses as well. That's at least how I see it. It'll be a fun way to sort of draw analogies with the blood moon again, and sort of just gives like a sense of progression and sort of something coming, some foreboding thing that is making all the people of Loran feel a bit scared, a bit uneasy. Something which she hadn't realized or couldn't have foreseen, I describe here in the Queen's Cannula. Something about how she takes a deal, and then she would never come to learn the true horror she had unwittingly brought upon the world. So essentially, to give birth to a Great One, it's always failed, I think, in the lore of the original game. And so it feels like it's something that's very difficult to cause to happen. My justification of why it might have been successful here is that the sort of requirement, the cost to have a successful Great One be born is that the whole city's like families, anyone who was pregnant or became pregnant during that time, they lose their child or their pregnancy fails or something like that. A bunch of horrible stuff happens. It's bad. It's not good. That's why, everyone's like, the Queen's been doing some weird shit. Everyone's family's distraught and stuff. And so a faction of people that are like, we've got to stop it. Whatever she's doing, it's bad. As soon as she became pregnant with this, whatever it was, the sky has become weird and everyone's kid is dying. So a faction sort of is born, and ultimately, like, perhaps as the eclipse sort of becomes full, maybe that's what like pushes them over the edge. The fear within them, the beastly fear, sort of erupts, and they go and they kill the Queen. So in this scene, it's described somewhere, but as you go up to the altar, you see like a crumpled figure in royal attire, like on the side of the altar, with stab wounds across their abdomen or something. And the Great One is like cradling like this little blob in like swaddling cloth. Essentially, it would have been the failed infant Great One that it was aiming for.
Aww.
And it basically has just sat there mourning over it in its nightmare since. Like, it's just been desperately sad in this never-ending dream of losing their child. So you go up to it and you go into its nightmare, and the idea is you slay, like, you get the message nightmare slain. In this case, it's literally you end its nightmare. You sort of free it from it to some extent by killing it in that space. It makes for a cool boss fight. That's the main purpose. But the reason it's there is just because it desperately wanted its kid. It didn't really think too much about the fact that a whole city's worth of people were losing their own. didn't matter too much. They're not too concerned with humans. They're generally sympathetic, I think the lore describes, but whatever. So that's the setup for this space. So that's why you find it here. That's why you fight it. And essentially, the doll's purpose, they are aware of this somehow. Perhaps it's like memories passed down from the moon presence to the infant great one. It's assumed that the infant great one and the doll can kind of converse somehow. And she now knows that basically she wants to take the infant great one to this, to Fauna is what I've named this. And, that should, to some extent, appease it. So the idea is that you bring it the child surrogate that it wanted, and you end the curse of the beast. So in the first game, you actually don't make any progress in terms of the curse of the beast. It's assumed that could still happen again. It's never really solved.
Wait, you give the baby great one to this creature?
Yes.
Oh.
So that's what happens at the end. So with enough,
that would be its child that it has failed to get through all of these human surrogates in the past.
Exactly. And now it has a real infant great one, and it is appeased. The sins of the past. Humanity did go and kill its child. That's not great.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe for good reason, but still, bad stuff breeds other bad stuff, and this is like the only chance to really try and undo some of that.
And so the final shot would be like confetti, a birthday party for the slug.
I have a very
fireworks.
I have the complete opposite. She, like, the doll and the infant great one just like go approach the Fauna, who's just like hovering above the sun altar at the top. So this altar, but in daytime, it's just kind of like quietly hovering above it if you have enough insight. And the doll will go over with the infant great one. They'll like just sort of quietly wave goodbye to you, and then the air will like shimmer slightly and they'll just disappear.
Well, that's
like a mirage.
Okay.
The air seems to shiver as they disappear from sight, and silence falls across Loran. The city seems finally to be at rest. So a brief and a brief note on the doll. The doll is built in Maria's image. When you kill Maria, the doll is clearly aware of that, and I wanted to make it essentially that the longer the doll exists, the more it sort of just takes on traits of Maria after Maria has been killed. Maria is like feels incredibly guilty after what she did to the fishing hamlet, so she has reason to want to do right by the great ones that she has done such wrong by in the past. So to me, I was like, that makes sense. It's a pretty good motivation. She's taken some of that on from Maria, and so apart from making the doll a more interesting character that you can like engage with throughout the game, I have the idea that you can do the make contact gesture to her. Or no, the opposite. Sorry. At some point, she might just like randomly do that to you, which would be like a fun, quirky thing. And if you clap in return, then you get like an insight or something. Like just fun things like that. Little details.
Reversing it.
Yeah, which just make it far more engaging. Like, and you can bring her like random gifts and stuff. So
Right on, man.
Nice.
That's basically it. A nice, happy ending, essentially, for the game, because who doesn't want a happy ending?
When you mention the fact that the great ones are described as generally sympathetic, it really is not that unbelievable that they would be, because that is a weird benevolent quality that is ascribed to them that is sort of weirdly out of character with everything else that's going on. So it is kind of believable, yeah, that you could get a kind of handshake deal at the end there.
Yep, and just the description of like how the curses are formed or sort of brought down upon humanity by the great ones. That seemed like, well, the other things that are described as curses, it's the curse of the beast. So why not? Why wouldn't that be the origin of the curse of the beast?
Right on.
And so there we go. That's the quick overview of the lore that's happening. And I hope that like essentially that is you can infer that from the information I've put in the piece with enough of the lore in the back.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's it.
And can I say that just in terms of the writing, like when you do a sequel, the things you repeat from the first thing, that sort of ingrains them as these are the actual themes, right? It like confirms it. So there was a lot there, and I think you did a great job being thoughtful. But just to say one thing that really stood out to me is like the repeating motif of it's another queen who has made another bad deal with a great one. That's not necessarily a given from Bloodborne 1, that it's like, this will be the frame of this recurring problem. That's not a given. And to have you frame it as that and repeat that theme makes that really interesting, makes it interesting that like, yeah, this could happen anywhere if such a noble person were to make a similar mistake. I think that's super cool.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the theme of repetition goes through a lot of their games, and I suppose this is a break from that because it implies an actual ending. Like you play the game the first time, you fail, and you go back to your hometown with some success because you now have like the blood healing abilities, and you've come from a place that's had some sort of tragedy. But you play the game again, and you get like an ending which puts an end to the game. So,
right on. Well, I have to thank you for sharing this with all of us. And,
thank you for listening to me for a good 2.5 hours.
It's very clear that you're very excited about what you do.
That's a great thing.
I'm so happy to see that.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, Thomas. This was awesome. And yeah, I mean, geez, look at how much hard work you put into it. You don't get to talk about it for a couple hours. I mean, come on, this stuff takes forever, you know? It really is. I think it's well earned.
Thank you.
So what I'd want to see what happens, because we're recording this before the results of the competition.
Indeed.
Afterward, I mean, I haven't seen the other entries, but this is a very powerful package. That's a bad phrase, but it's a very, complete package. And I'd be surprised if this doesn't make it into the top tier, winning, whatever. So yeah, we should do a follow-up after that, and then kind of discuss that. Maybe
that would be good.
Invite him onto, or maybe he'll invite you onto his channel. I don't know. We'll see.
That would be really cool. I mean, he's big, got a good 2 mil subscribers or something. So if he did, that would be awesome, because I would love to chat about this kind of thing, and perhaps something, an entry that I hope has as much impact as this might. That could be a great sort of jumping off point to have a good discussion like that, because it'd be really cool to hear his interpretations and things.
Right. Is this posted publicly, or is it submitted to like some kind of private link?
It's not, so I've just put it on that Google Drive, so I will be posting it to ArtStation.
But I think we can end the video here. Are there any last words, Mr. Thomas?
You got to be passionate, when you find something that you're really enjoying, obviously keep going with it. Something I hadn't realized when going in was that I was going to do as much work on this, because I just didn't know how into it I would get. But as soon as I started doing that, writing out on a page, doing all the deep lore diving, I just fell in love with it. So
awesome. Great to see.
Let your creativity flow.
Yes. Stephen, any last thoughts?
No, just ditto to what Thomas said. I mean, he proved it right here. The proof is in the pudding. The fun is what matters. You gotta love it. Right. It's like, look for the stuff that is really giving you a lot of energy. That's great.
Absolutely. Even if it's just tentacles. Cool. All right. So we'll thank you to everyone who watched this, and definitely check out the links in the description. And we'll see you next time for possibly a follow-up.
Yes.
All right, thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching. Bye.